Chapter 798. The middle-aged man in front of him was someone he had met once. It was the person who had threatened him in the black-yellow great world. Desolate God. He still remembered him. The desolate God glanced at Yi Xian and did not speak. At this time, the old man smiled and said, "Let me formally introduce myself. I am Zhu Wei Tian, the current temple lord." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He opened his palm and the World Prison Pagoda appeared in his hand. The moment the World Prison Pagoda appeared, everyone's eyes turned to look at it. Yi Xian said, "Senior asked me to come here because you want to know about this pagoda and the 5 dimensions, right?" Zhu Wei Tian nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian smiled and said, "The name and origin of this pagoda are clear to everyone, so I will not introduce it too much. Let me tell you something Senior does not know." Zhu Wei Tian nodded. "Please speak." Yi Xian said, "This object has 9 layers, each layer contains 9 kinds of Tao laws from the 5 dimensions." The desolate God suddenly said, "Take a look." Yi Xian opened his palm and the great Tao law appeared in his hand. Soon, the energy contained in the surrounding earth began to move restlessly. Obviously, it felt the great Tao law. Zhu Wei Tian said softly, "It really is the Tao law from the 5 dimensions." Yi Xian nodded and put away the great Tao law. At this time, the desolate God suddenly said, "My temple wants this object." Yi Xian looked at the desolate God and said, "Are you stupid?" Hearing this, the atmosphere instantly became awkward. The desolate God narrowed his eyes and said, "Say that again." Yi Xian grinned. "I asked if you are stupid." The desolate God waved his right hand and a powerful force suddenly swept towards Yi Xian. At this time, the immortal slaying sword gourd suddenly appeared in Yi Xian's hand. The next moment, a sword light tore through the space. Rumble. A powerful aura suddenly shook the hall, but it disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Yi Xian looked at Zhu Wei. Zhu Wei had made his move. The origami coldly looked at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, you seem to think too highly of yourself." Yi Xian shrugged. "Looks like we can't work together anymore. Since that's the case, I'll take my leave." With that, he turned around and left. The desolate God sneered, "You want to leave? You?" Right at this moment, Zhu Wei Tian glanced coldly at the origami. The latter hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything in the end. However, her gaze grew even colder. At this time, Yi Xian had already walked out of the main hall, but in the next moment, he returned to the main hall without any warning. Yi Xian looked at Zhu Wei Tian. It was him again. Zhu Wei Tian smiled and said, "Something unpleasant happened. I hope you don't mind." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I mind very much." Zhu Wei Tian looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian said, "2 things. First, make him apologize. Second, make him leave." Hearing this, the desolate God's eyes flashed with killing intent. Zhu Wei Tian said softly, "Are you serious?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Very serious." Zhu Wei Tian smiled and said, "Actually, I'm very curious about what you're relying on." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled, "Senior, I'm a little disappointed. Lady Zhu told me that the temple wants to work with me, so I came here. I came here with a sincere heart. But now, I suddenly realized that you don't seem to be sincere in working with me." With that, he looked at the desolate God and said, "You asked me for the 5-dimensional Tao law. I really want to ask, what are you relying on? Of course, if you say it's based on strength, then I have nothing to say. We can continue fighting. What's the point of talking about working together?" The desolate God was expressionless. "Fight? What are you going to use?" Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, "Have you forgotten how the god of the temple died? With that, he waved his right hand and 4 swords suddenly appeared in front of him. The swords of the plain-dressed woman, Xiaoqi, the executing heaven sword, and the black sword. These 4 swords, after Qing'er left, had been separated again. However, he didn't use the other 3 swords. Seeing these 4 swords, Huang Shi's expression became serious. How did the god of the temple die? The temple knew very well. He was killed by that woman in an instant. Killed in an instant. How big was the gap between them to be able to kill in an instant? Apart from that mysterious woman, there was also a plain-dressed woman. Yi Xian didn't waste any words. He immediately started to force the 4 swords together. Seeing this, the desolate god's expression changed. This Yi Xian said he was going to fight. Zhu Wei Tian also frowned. He didn't expect Yi Xian to start fighting without a word. Not far away, Zhu Xier suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She grabbed Yi Xian's arm and shook her head. Not to this extent. Yi Xian said coldly, Miss Zhu, look at this. Is the temple trying to negotiate with me? This isn't a negotiation at all. This is robbery. I can't stand this. Let's fight. Be more direct. With that, he put the executing heaven sword and Xiaoqi's sword together. Wang! A sword's cry suddenly rang through the sky. A strong sword will rippled out from the newly merged swords. Seeing this, the desolate god and the rest's expression changed. Yi Xian was also slightly stunned. He didn't expect these 2 swords to be able to be combined. Other than the time when he combined 4 swords into one, he had never combined 4 swords. This time, he didn't expect these 2 swords to be able to be combined. Yi Xian quickly grabbed the hard sword. The moment it touched his hand, a strong sword will surged into his body. Boom! Yi Xian's body shook violently. The next moment, 2 sword wills emitted from his body. Good and evil sword will. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Power. At this moment, he felt another power other than the executing heaven sword. This power should be from Xiaoqi's sword. He had never felt it before. What kind of power was this? Yi Xian was puzzled. At this moment, Zhu Xier hurriedly said, Yi Xian, things really haven't reached that stage. Yi Xian collected his thoughts. He looked at Zhu Xier. Miss Zhu, where do you think things have reached? Zhu Xier was silent for a moment before turning to Zhu Wei Tian. What does grandfather want? Zhu Wei Tian looked at Yi Xian. He just wants to understand the 5 dimensions. Understand the 5 dimensions. Zhu Xier looked at Zhu Wei Tian. Can I talk to him? Zhu Wei Tian was silent for a moment before nodding. All right. Zhu Xier looked at Desolate God. You better not interfere. Desolate God's face was a little ugly. Zhu Wei Tian suddenly said, he won't interfere. Zhu Xier nodded. She turned to Yi Xian. Let's go. After that, she brought Yi Xian out of the hall. At this moment, Yi Xian didn't continue. He was a little excited. The 2 swords were actually fused by him just like that. Moreover, he realized that Xiaoqi's sword contained a strong power. What an unexpected surprise. After the 2 of them left, Desolate God said solemnly, are we going to let him be so arrogant? Zhu Wei Tian said calmly, start a war with him? Desolate God shook her head. Why should the temple fear him? Zhu Wei Tian was expressionless. It isn't that we fear him. It isn't worth it. That 5th-dimensional treasure is not something that my deity's Templar can possess. Desolate God sighed. Just because it possesses the karma of the 5 dimensions? We are all cultivators and have many karma with us. If we are afraid of this and that, then what is the point of cultivating? After that, he turned and left. Zhu Wei Tian shook his head and didn't say anything. The black-robed old man beside Zhu Wei Tian said softly, "He is very ambitious." Zhu Wei Tian said flatly, "I hope he doesn't do anything stupid." The black-robed old man hesitated. "Is it really impossible to keep that treasure forever?" Zhu Wei Tian smiled. "Why? Even you don't believe me?" The black-robed old man shook his head. "Of course not. I am just unwilling." Zhu Wei Tian said softly, "How can I be willing? However, if the temple takes it by force, then we have to accept all the karma of it." "We can't." The black-robed old man said, "Can Yi Xian handle it?" Zhu Wei Tian shook his head. "He can't handle it. However, from the looks of it, someone is blocking the karma for him. It should be the two people behind him." He shook his head again. "After we know what we want to know, let him leave quickly. I have a bad feeling about him staying here." This feeling is getting stronger and stronger. The black-robed old man was shocked. "Bad feeling?" Zhu Wei Tian nodded. "This feeling is getting stronger and stronger. Something bad is about to happen." The black-robed old man said, "Then let him leave as soon as possible." Zhu Wei Tian nodded. There was still a trace of worry in his eyes. At his level, to have such a feeling meant that something bad was about to happen. However, he didn't know what it was. But he knew that it was definitely related to Yi Xian. Zhu Xiaer brought Yi Xian to a riverside. The two of them walked while Yi Xian held the sword in his hand. The sword formed by Shao Qi and the executing heaven sword. Suddenly, Zhu Xiaer said, "You are too hot-tempered." Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at Zhu Xiaer. He smiled. "Actually, what the desolate god said must have been approved by your grandfather." Zhu Xiaer was silent. Yi Xian said again, "If I compromise, the divine palace will be insatiable. You will slaughter me like a pig, won't you?" Zhu Xiaer looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. "You seem to be able to see everything clearly." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Miss Zhu, just ask me what you want to know. I don't want to work with the temple, but I am willing to work with you. After you ask, I will go to your God Book Hall." Zhu Xiaer, seeing that Zhu Xiaer didn't speak, Yi Xian said, "Ask. I will tell you everything I know." Zhu Xiaer was silent for a while before saying, "Tell me honestly. Has this pagoda recognized you as its owner?" Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, a voice rang in Yi Xian's head. "You might be in trouble." Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. "Trouble? P.S. 4 minutes late, sorry." Chapter 799. The Voice of the Eighth Floor. Yi Xian asked in his heart, "What does senior mean?" The eighth floor did not reply. Yi Xian's face darkened as he asked again, "Senior, what is going on?" The eighth floor still did not reply. Yi Xian suddenly had a bad feeling. Zhu Xiaer suddenly asked, "What is it?" Yi Xian shook his head, "Nothing, Miss Zhu, just ask what you want to know." Zhu Xiaer looked at Yi Xian and started asking. Zhu Xiaer asked about the fifth dimension, and Yi Xian did not hide anything. This was because he himself did not know much about the fifth dimension. Of course, he knew more than others. About 4 hours later, Zhu Xiaer turned and left. Yi Xian immediately returned to the God Book Hall. This time, he did not study the fifth Tao but started to read all the ancient books in the God Book City. He wanted to memorize all of them. Because they were too useful. The ancient books in the God Book Hall were not only about martial arts but also about culture. For example, the origin of the black-yellow great world, some secret realms of the fourth dimension, and some legends of people. In short, it was all-encompassing and had everything. And they were all very precious and valuable things. As he read, Yi Xian was even more shocked. At this moment, he realized that this God Book Hall was a little scary as it had preserved its history and culture very well. In the following time, Yi Xian started to record the ancient books in the God Book Hall. Although he could not take it away, he could record it down. And these things would be of great help to him in the future. On the other side, in a large hall, Zhu Xier was talking to Zhu Weitian, and about 4 hours later, Zhu Weitian asked softly, "Is he hiding anything?" Zhu Xier replied solemnly, "I don't know, but we have gotten what we wanted. Isn't that right?" Zhu Weitian walked to the front of the hall and looked at the horizon with a blank look in his eyes. The fifth dimension is higher than the fourth dimension. Although I already knew, it is still hard to accept it from him. The martial arts civilization of the fifth dimension far surpassed that of the fourth dimension. What did this mean? This meant that once the barrier to the fifth dimension was forcefully opened, the fourth dimension would most likely be enslaved and oppressed by others. This world was cruel. Searching for the fifth dimension was the same as the weak looking for the strong. Would there be any good results from this? Of course, for those who stood at the peak of the fourth dimension, it was definitely beneficial. This was because when they reached the fifth dimension, they would not be too weak. On the contrary, they could use the more advanced martial arts civilization in the fifth dimension to break through. But what about the people in the four-dimensional universe? At this moment, Zhu Weitian said softly, "I suddenly have a feeling that someone deliberately used a special method to seal the path from the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension. The other party did this to protect the fourth dimension, protect the four-dimensional universe?" Zhu Xier looked at Zhu Weitian. "What do you mean?" Zhu Weitian shook his head. "It's just an intuition." Zhu Xier said solemnly, "But doing so is equivalent to sealing off one of our paths to this world." Zhu Weitian laughed. "It's better than the destruction of the four-dimensional universe, isn't it?" Zhu Xier was silent. If the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension connected, what would the result be? Would the fifth dimension accept the fourth dimension and help the fourth dimension? Green City, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From this moment onwards, Yi Xian's position as the crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man stood a youth. The youth had a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this moment, a timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone looked over and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old. Her two small hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pale color and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. Her name was Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she ignored her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the ancestral hall, asking timidly, "Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the crown prince. Why did you remove him for no reason?" The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. This is truly unfair. How dare you?" The Great Elder suddenly shouted angrily, "It's not up to a little girl like you to decide whether to remove him or not. Someone, drag her away." At this moment, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, "You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder said coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Soon, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang will inherit the position of crown prince. What are you shouting for?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. The crisp sound of the slap was heard. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She just covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, "What's your name?" The guard quickly bowed, "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded, "You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I will need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply, "This subordinate will go through fire and water for the crown prince. I will risk my life for you." Yi Lang nodded slightly, "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show any mercy. Do you understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooey! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped down on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no morals. From now on, Yi Xian's position will be removed, and Yi Lang will take over. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man stood a young man with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was about to be removed, she ignored her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the hall, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince, why did you remove him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly, this is a matter of the clan, why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look at the Great Elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides. Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan, and we don't know if he's dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove him from the position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged, whether he's removed or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this moment, the newly appointed Prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed, you should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder said coldly, then flog 30 times. Soon, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the newly appointed Prince Yi Lang, and he knew it was his chance to show off. The guard sneered, young Master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position, and it's everyone's wish. What are you shouting for? With that, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up, but she did not cry. She just held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, what's your name? The guard quickly bowed, subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, you're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and he quickly bowed deeply, I'll go through fire and water for the crown prince, and I'll do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded slightly, drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall, so don't show any mercy. Do you understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. Immediately, he grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was torn, and there was blood everywhere. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the South Mountain. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage, who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak, when Yi Xian suddenly leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him and said, your man. As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me." Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked up to Yi Ling, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 800. Zhu Xie's expression changed drastically when he heard this voice. Something's wrong. Zhu Xie ignored Yi Xian and flew up into the sky. At this moment, countless experts from temple were rushing over swiftly. Beside Zhu Xie, Zhu Weitian's expression was extremely solemn. He stared into the distance where there was a pitch-black spatial black hole 1,000 feet away. In front of the black hole stood 4 men in black with spears in their hands. These 4 men were like phantoms, and their bodies could not be seen clearly. Zhu Xie asked solemnly, "Who are they?" Zhu Wei shook his head, "I don't know." Zhu Xie's expression changed drastically. "I don't know. This is a serious matter. A power that even temple doesn't know about." At this moment, she understood why her grandfather was so solemn. After all, temple wasn't weak even against the dual world sky and the life forbidden zone. Temple had the ability to do so. In the entire four-dimensional universe, only the dual realm sky and the life forbidden zone could make the divine temple feel apprehensive. However, these people didn't come from either of those places. So here's the problem. Where exactly are they from? What power are they from? Right at this moment, a middle-aged man walked out from the black hole in the distance. He wore a dark golden robe, had long hair that hung loosely on his shoulders, and there was a dark red mark between his brows. Strands of black gas emanated from his body, and they slithered around him like snakes. After the middle-aged man walked out from the black hole, his gaze descended onto Zhu Wei. Yi Xian. Yi Xian. He's here for Yi Xian. Zhu Xie's face fell. Now she knew why that fellow, Yi Xian, had come back. He saw that the situation wasn't good. Zhu Wei looked at the middle-aged man. "You are?" The middle-aged man stared at Zhu Wei and said, "Yi Xian." Yi Xian. Zhu Wei fell silent for a moment before he said, "Who are you?" Meanwhile, the middle-aged man suddenly appeared before Zhu Wei, and he just stared at him. "Hand it over." Zhu Wei suddenly waved his right hand. Bang! A powerful force surged out from his sleeve. However, before this force could approach the middle-aged man, it vanished without a trace. Seeing this, Zhu Weitian's expression changed. His opponent's strength was above him, or rather, far above him. The middle-aged man looked down. "Let him come out. Otherwise, the temple will be destroyed." The Temple of Light had been destroyed. Zhu Weitian's face darkened. Destroy the temple? It had to be said that the other party was quite arrogant. However, he still didn't make a move because the temple wouldn't make such a powerful enemy just for Yi Xian. Zhu Weitian turned around and looked down. At that moment, Yi Xian was already hiding in the scripture hall. Zhu Weitian remained silent for a moment, and he was about to speak. However, the door to the divine library suddenly opened, and Yi Xian walked out. Yi Xian looked at the sky and smiled, "Senior Zhu, don't worry. I won't stay here and refuse to leave." As he spoke, he looked at the middle-aged man. "How should I address you?" The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. "Xijing." Yi Xian asked in a low voice, "What force do you belong to?" The middle-aged man said, "No comment." Yi Xian opened his palm, and the pagoda appeared in his hand. Do you want this pagoda? The middle-aged man shook his head. Seeing this, Yi Xian frowned. You don't want this pagoda? The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. I want the pagoda, and I want the person too. Yi Xian's face darkened. Not only did they want his wealth, but they also wanted his life. Yi Xian suddenly attacked. Buzz! The sound of a sword howling shot up into the sky. In the air, the middle-aged man opened his palm and pressed it down lightly. Rumble! The entire sky trembled as if it was about to explode. As for Yi Xian's sword, it was forcefully suppressed in the air, unable to move an inch forward. However, at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stomped his right foot, and his sword pierced through the powerful force. Immeasurable sword. It disregarded everything. In the blink of an eye, the sword arrived in front of Zhijing. The latter frowned and punched out. Rumble. The sword light instantly shattered, but Zhijing himself was pushed back dozens of feet. Not only that, but there was a deep sword mark on his fist. As for Yi Xian, he had vanished without a trace. Zhijing glanced at his fist and frowned. There was a trace of disbelief in his eyes. He hadn't expected that Yi Xian would be able to injure him. Moments later, Zhijing scanned the surroundings. There was no sign of Yi Xian's aura. After a moment of silence, Zhijing opened his right hand, and a golden knife suddenly shot up into the sky. In the next moment, the golden knife suddenly erupted with a golden light that instantly enveloped the entire ruins of God. However, he still couldn't find Yi Xian. Zhijing's brows instantly furrowed. That was it? That was completely impossible. Zhu Wei Tian's eyes were also filled with astonishment because he also couldn't find Yi Xian. It was as if Yi Xian had evaporated from the face of the earth. Zhijing was silent for a moment, then looked at Zhu Wei Tian. Is that item in the hands of your temple, or is it in his hands? Zhu Wei Tian said solemnly, it's in his hands. Zhijing nodded, then turned and left. The four people behind him suddenly disappeared mysteriously. Watching Zhijing and the others leave, Zhu Wei Tian's expression became extremely solemn. What kind of power is this? My temple actually knows nothing about them. Zhu Xia's expression was also extremely solemn. Now that the temple had a basic understanding of the major powers in the four-dimensional universe, the temple actually knew nothing about this sudden appearance of Zhijing and the others. In this four-dimensional universe, there was a power even more mysterious than the dual-world skies and the life-forbidden zone. At this moment, Zhu Wei Tian suddenly said, pass down my orders, no one is to find trouble with that Yi Xian, and no one is to interfere in his affairs. At this moment, he realized that the waters of Yi Xian were getting murkier and murkier. Zhu Xia nodded, understood. Only now did she understand why Zhu Wei Tian did not dare to take the pagoda. This pagoda, whoever took it would be unlucky. Because there were simply too many people who coveted this pagoda. Zhu Xia raised his head to look at the starry sky far away. I wonder if this guy can make it through. Far away in the starry sky, Yi Xian walked slowly. At this moment, he was in a state of emptiness, and no one could see him. Yi Xian's face was a little gloomy. After the temple's crisis was resolved, this Zhijing appeared. F***ck, this is endless. Can't you just let me rest for a while? If this goes on, who can take it? Yi Xian sat down cross-legged, looking at the sword in his hand. This was a combination of two swords, and just now, he had used this sword to injure that Zhijing. And would the other party let it go? Definitely not. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian's face became even more gloomy. There was really no end to this. Right at this moment, the space before him suddenly trembled, and it didn't take long for Zhu Xia's voice to resound. They've gone to Black Origin World. Yi Xian's pupils constricted when he heard this, and then he vanished on the spot. Black Origin World. On this day, 5 people suddenly appeared in the sky above the northern territory of Black Origin World. These 5 people were Zijing and the others. In midair, Xiao Tian gazed at Zijing and the others with an extremely solemn expression. Zijing glanced at Xiao Tian and said, "Ask him to come out." Yi Xian. Xiao Tian said, "He isn't in the north." Zijing nodded slightly, "He will come out." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly opened his right hand and pressed it down lightly. Bang! A powerful force suddenly swept down from midair, and then the space in the surroundings instantly started to crack apart inch by inch. Xiao Tian's eyes instantly narrowed when she witnessed this scene, and then she vanished on the spot. Bang! A powerful force tore through the surroundings and shot straight at Zijing. Zijing glanced at Xiao Tian. In the next moment, a strand of black energy suddenly flew out from around him, and then a ferocious face suddenly smiled ferociously from within the black energy. At the same time, a strange and ferocious laughter resounded. Rumble! An explosion suddenly resounded in midair, and then a figure retreated repeatedly. It was Xiao Tian. After retreating for over 3 kilometers, Xiao Tian suddenly stopped moving, and a wisp of blood slowly seeped out from the corner of her mouth. Xiao Tian stared coldly at Zijing. "You're a world-shocking expert at any rate, yet you don't even have the pride of an expert?" Zijing shook his head. "One who achieves great things doesn't bother about trifles." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly opened his right hand and pressed it down once more. Sky River City started to collapse inch by inch, and then countless shrill cries resounded throughout the city. Xiao Tian's expression changed drastically, and she was just about to attack again when a ray of white light suddenly shot into the sky from below. In the next moment, a spear pierced through the heavens and the earth and shot straight towards Zijing. Zijing's eyes narrowed slightly as he pressed the fingers of his right hand together. Bang! The spear was forcefully stopped on the spot, and it was a white-clothed woman who stood behind the spear. Anlanxiu. Anlanxiu suddenly grabbed the spear with her right hand, and then she stabbed it forward. Hiss! The sound of something tearing resounded. At the same time, a ray of spear light smashed straight towards Zijing. Zijing's face remained emotionless as he waved his right hand. Bang! The ray of spear light instantly shattered. However, a spear suddenly arrived before the center of his forehead, but it stopped half an inch away from his forehead. Because the spear had been clamped between 2 fingers. Zijing's fingers shook lightly, and then Anlanxiu was instantly blasted 3 kilometers away along with her spear. Zijing was just about to attack again when a ray of light suddenly tore through the sky towards him. The boundless sword. It was Yi Xian. Zijing's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he suddenly clenched his right hand into a fist and smashed it forward. Bang! The ray of light shattered, and then Yi Xian instantly retreated 3 kilometers away. This time, Yi Xian hadn't chosen to conceal himself. Zijing gazed at Yi Xian and was just about to attack when a man suddenly appeared behind him. Wuxia. At this moment, a powerful force was trembling around Wuxia's body. Zijing glanced at Yi Xian's group of 3, "Shall we attack together?" Wuxia gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian was just about to attack when the howl of a sword suddenly resounded from below, and it didn't take long for a woman to walk out from a room. The person who walked out was Shao Qi. Sword light coiled around Shao Qi's body like a bolt of lightning, and it was extremely shocking. Shao Qi gazed at Yi Xian. "You're not alone. P.S. I can smell the monthly tickets." Chapter 801. At this moment, everyone in Tianjiang City was looking at Zijing in the sky. Just how strong was this person before them? No one knew. Even Xiao Tian couldn't see through Zijing's true strength. She couldn't sense it. This Zhijing gave her the feeling of a vast starry sky, unfathomable. To be able to make her feel unfathomable. Just how terrifying was he? Qiao Tian's expression was unprecedentedly serious. And Yi Xian didn't know Zhijing's true strength either. Life realm? Or life destruction? According to his guess, Zhijing was at least life destruction. He might even be an expert above that. Could he beat him? He definitely couldn't, but he had to fight. Yi Xian looked at Enlanxiu and Mo Xie. He was about to speak when Mo Xie chuckled, "Brother Yi, the North is everyone's big family. You can't support it alone. Let me be the vanguard." With that, he slowly closed his eyes. A powerful force began to gather around him. In the next moment, he suddenly opened his eyes. Two dark yellow pillars of light shot out from his eyes. Wherever the two pillars of light passed, space began to be annihilated inch by inch. Zhijing frowned, special ability. With that, a wisp of black gas suddenly flew out from beside him. Boom! The two dark yellow pillars of light instantly shattered. At the same time, the wisp of black gas arrived in front of Mo Xie. Mo Xie suddenly roared, "Ancestor descends!" Boom! A powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body. Rumble! The wisp of black gas was blasted back in front of Zhijing. Everyone looked at Mo Xie. At this moment, there was a huge phantom of an old man behind Mo Xie. The old man's expression was indifferent, and his body exuded a monstrous pressure. Zhijing coldly glanced at the phantom of the old man. "Ancestor descends. An ancient secret technique. Interesting." With that, he suddenly pointed at the air with his fingers. A wisp of black gas suddenly flew out from his shoulder. In the distance, Mo Xie suddenly brought his hands together. In the blink of an eye, his hands suddenly shook outwards. Boom! An invisible force shook out. In an instant, the space in front of him collapsed inch by inch. At this moment, the wisp of black gas arrived. Rumble! A deafening explosion suddenly resounded in the sky above the north. In the sky, Missouri Xie rapidly retreated. This time, the old man behind him became even more illusory. However, the black gas still existed. It was like a bolt of lightning that shot straight at Mo Xie. However, at this moment, a sword light suddenly slashed the black gas. Bang! The wisp of black gas was instantly stopped on the spot by the sword light. The wisp of black gas was struck by the sword light. In front of Mo Xie, Yi Xian said, "How do you feel?" Mo Xie wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled, "I can still fight." Yi Xian nodded. "None of us can defeat this guy." As he spoke, he looked at Zhijing. "I, Yi Xian, am not someone who likes to bully others. You have two choices. First, you lower your level to the same level as me, and we will fight one-on-one. Second, you bully the weak, and we will gang up on you." Zhijing looked at Yi Xian. "You want to fight one-on-one?" Zhijing looked at Yi Xian. "You want to fight?" Zhijing nodded slightly. "I'll fulfill your wish." As soon as he finished speaking, his aura plummeted. It didn't take long for his cultivation base to drop to the unknown realm. With that, his aura suddenly dropped. Soon, his realm dropped to the unknown realm. Next to Yi Xian, Mo Xie said in a deep voice, "Watch out." Although the other party had lowered his cultivation, everyone knew that his battle awareness and the usage of some martial techniques would not be reduced in the slightest. The opponent still had a huge advantage. The opponent still had a great advantage. Naturally, Yi Xian also understood this. He looked at Zhijing and was about to speak when Zhijing suddenly said, "Do you know why I dropped my realm?" At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. Boundless sword. Seeing Yi Xian suddenly attack, Zhijing narrowed his eyes. he suddenly put his hands together. This time, two wisps of black gas suddenly gathered together, directly clamping Yi Xian's sword light. However, two of his fingers immediately cracked. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly spun the executing heaven sword in his hand. Ji Jing's expression changed. His right hand gripped the executing heaven sword, and his left hand punched at Yi Xian's face. The moment Ji Jing punched, Yi Xian's left hand punched back. Boom! The two collided and separated, but the moment they separated, several sword lights slashed straight at Ji Jing. Ji Jing waved his right hand, directly blocking all the sword lights. However, at this time, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him, and the next moment, a sword was already at his forehead. Fast. Yi Xian's sword was not fast, but his timing was very good. Ji Jing frowned slightly. This Yi Xian's attainments in the way of the sword were a little beyond his expectations. Without thinking too much about it, he suddenly tilted his head and dodged Yi Xian's sword by a hair. At the same time, his right hand clenched into a fist, and then he suddenly smashed a hook at Yi Xian. But at practically the same time, Yi Xian's sword suddenly slashed horizontally, and it slashed straight at Ji Jing's throat. Ji Jing's punch was able to hit Yi Xian, but the price he had to pay was to take Yi Xian's sword head-on. Moreover, neither of them dodged. Bang! Hiss! In an instant, both of them retreated explosively. Ji Jing only stopped after retreating an entire 300 m. At practically the same time, Yi Xian stopped as well. At this moment, Yi Xian's face wasn't very good, and it was slightly red and swollen. Moreover, Ji Jing had paid the price as well. There was a sword mark on his throat. He was bleeding. But it wasn't fatal. Ji Jing's body was extremely strong. Ji Jing looked at Yi Xian. I underestimated you a little. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward. As soon as he did, his entire body instantly became illusory. An image of a fist suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Bang! The space around Yi Xian instantly exploded apart. Moreover, his body had even cracked apart at this moment. Yi Xian suddenly slashed down with his sword. Bang! The image of a fist was instantly stopped on the spot by this strike, but it didn't shatter. Meanwhile, an afterimage suddenly flashed by in front of him. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly, and he raised his sword to block it. Bang! Yi Xian was instantly blasted over 1 kilometer away, and he hadn't even stopped moving when an afterimage tore through the surroundings. Suddenly, a sword howl resounded from afar. In the next moment, Ji Jing instantly retreated explosively by 3 kilometers. Moreover, one of his ears had vanished, and blood was flowing from it. Ji Jing stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Besides that sword, there was a bottle gourd in Yi Xian's hand. The Immortal Annihilation Sword Gourd. Just now, he'd been blasted back by the combination of Yi Xian's Immortal Annihilation Sword and the Executing Heaven Sword. There was a trace of a solemn expression in Ji Jing's eyes. If he hadn't reacted extremely quickly just now, then he wouldn't have just lost his ear, it would have been his entire body. Ji Jing slowly clenched his right fist. In an instant, a strand of formidable energy converged in his fist. At the same time, numerous strands of black energy suddenly appeared around him. Yi Xian waved his right hand, and then the Executing Heaven Sword flew directly into the Immortal Annihilation Sword Gourd. Oam! A sword howl resounded from within the Immortal Annihilation Sword. At this moment, the Executing Heaven Sword was a combination of two swords. So, when the Immortal Annihilation Sword Gourd was added to it, its might could be said to have risen to another level. Right at this moment, Ji Jing suddenly vanished on the spot. In an instant, countless strands of black energy surged down like a storm towards Yi Xian. Hiss! 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 Hiss. Numerous tearing sounds resounded like firecrackers, and it was extremely shocking. The expressions of Enlancio and the others changed when they witnessed this scene. Even though Yi Xian was strong, Ji Jing was even more terrifying. Yi Xian took a deep breath, and then he suddenly roared furiously, slash. As soon as his voice resounded. Oam! A sword howl suddenly resounded, and then a ray of light shot out from Yi Xian's immortal annihilation sword gourd. The ray of light tore through the sky and tore everything in its path apart. This attack seemed as if it intended to slash the heavens and the earth into pieces, and it was extremely terrifying. The spectators watched as Yi Xian's attack was instantly drowned by countless strands of black energy. There was no movement. There was actually no movement from this attack that shook the heavens and the earth. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. At this moment, Yi Xian was stunned as well. What's going on? Because he's actually unable to sense the existence of the executing heaven sword. Right at this moment, the strands of black energy suddenly started trembling, and then an afterimage suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't even have the time to react before a sword stabbed into his stomach where his heart was. At the same time, a voice suddenly resounded by his ears. I am a swordsman. My sword is swifter than yours. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 802. It was a swordsman. At this moment, everyone here was stunned. No one had expected that Ji Jing would actually be a swordsman. Moreover, his sword was actually so swift. In front of Yi Xian, Ji Jing looked at him coldly. Are you surprised? Yi Xian grinned. I'm a little surprised. And a pleasant surprise. Ji Jing frowned slightly when he heard this, and then his expression changed drastically. He was about to retreat when Yi Xian suddenly swung his sword. Hiss! Everyone watched as one of Ji Jing's arms flew into the air. Ji Jing stared fixedly at Yi Xian from over 1 kilometer away. How could this be possible? Everyone was looking at Yi Xian because a sword was still sticking out of Yi Xian's stomach. However, Yi Xian was completely unharmed. Moreover, Yi Xian's body was actually absorbing the sword at a maddening rate. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to completely absorb the sword. Yi Xian's face was covered in an intoxicated expression, and he grinned as he gazed at Ji Jing. This sword isn't bad. It's a great tonic. As soon as he finished speaking, the immortal slayer sword gourd in his hand suddenly trembled violently, and then a ray of light suddenly tore through the air. Ji Jing's eyes narrowed slightly when he witnessed this scene, and then he suddenly pressed the fingers of his left hand together and tapped forward lightly. After that, he spun it, and then a strand of black energy suddenly transformed into a black sword that shot forward. It didn't take long for the black sword to slash down on Yi Xian's execution heaven sword. Bang! In an instant, the black sword exploded apart. However, the execution heaven sword didn't slow down at all as it continued shooting towards Ji Jing. Everywhere it passed, space was torn apart inch by inch, and it was an extremely shocking sight. Suddenly, Ji Jing formed a sword seal with his left hand, and then he muttered, 10,000 swords converge. Oam! A sword howl resounded through the sky, and then countless ghastly blue swords of energy suddenly appeared in front of Ji Jing. Ji Jing pressed his fingers together and pointed forward, go. Chi 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 chi, countless energy swords shot out, and when they were about 10 zhang away from Yi Xian's executing heaven sword, these energy swords suddenly trembled violently, and then the 10,000 swords merged into one. The moment they fused together, a powerful force instantly shattered the surrounding space. Rumble. Under everyone's gaze, a powerful wave of sword chi suddenly erupted between the two swords. Boom boom boom. The entire sky began to be destroyed inch by inch. Below them, countless northern region experts hurriedly joined forces to resist this power. If the shockwaves of this power were to reach the northern region, the entire northern region would be destroyed. In the sky, the battle between Yi Xian and Ji Jing was not over yet. Yi Xian opened his palm and the executing heaven sword returned to his hand. Countless sword chi raged around him, but they were all blocked by the good and evil sword essence from his body. In the distance, the black aura around Ji Jing was also completely blocked by the black aura around him. The two of them looked at each other from afar. Suddenly, Yi Xian moved. Chi Chi. A ray of sword light tore through the battlefield. Immeasurable sword. In the distance, Ji Jing narrowed his eyes. He suddenly clenched his left hand, and the black aura around him instantly condensed into a black sword. In the blink of an eye, this black sword suddenly flew out, but the moment it flew out, a sword directly pierced its tip. Boom! The black sword shook violently, and then cracked. At the same time, Ji Jing instantly retreated hundreds of zhang away, and the moment he stopped, the black sword in his hand directly exploded. At this moment, not far away, Yi Xian suddenly pointed his sword at Ji Jing from afar. Soul-suppressing sword. Ji Jing's body trembled violently, and at this moment, his expression changed greatly. He suddenly slammed his left hand down. Boom! A powerful force suddenly shook in front of him, and he himself had already retreated hundreds of zhang away. But before he could stop, another ray of sword light appeared in front of him. Immeasurable sword. This sword was another immeasurable sword. Ji Jing's pupils suddenly shrank. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly swept out from Ji Jing's body, and this aura directly shattered Yi Xian's ray of sword light. Not only that, but the executing heaven sword was also blasted away. In the distance, Yi Xian opened his palm, and the executing heaven sword flew back into his hand. Yi Xian looked at Ji Jing expressionlessly. At this moment, Ji Jing had already recovered his realm. Below, everyone's expression darkened. Anlanxiu stared at Ji Jing, and her right hand tightly gripped the spear in her hand. Wuxia also slowly clenched his fists. The calmest one was Shao Qi. From beginning to end, Shao Qi's expression was very calm. After recovering his realm, Ji Jing's right hand instantly grew back. Experts at their level were very difficult to kill. Ji Jing looked at Yi Xian. You have an extraordinary amount of treasures. Yi Xian smiled. Then we won't use any equipment, and we won't use any profound energy. How about it? A competition of fundamentals. Ji Jing shook his head. I have no interest in continuing to waste time with you. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm. Countless wisps of black gas suddenly flew out of his palm. The wisps of black gas turned into beams of sword radiance as soon as they flew out. Countless sword radiances shot towards Yi Xian. At this moment, these black swords were countless times stronger than before. Because Ji Jing had recovered his realm. In the distance, Yi Xian watched the countless rays of sword light engulf him with a calm expression. At this moment, Shao Qi, Anlanxiu, and Wuxia suddenly appeared by his side. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth lifted slightly. Attack. As soon as he finished speaking, the executing heaven sword suddenly flew out from his immortal slaying sword gourd. Buzz! A sword hum suddenly resounded, and then a ray of sword light tore through the air. On the other hand, Shao Qi, who stood by Yi Xian's side, suddenly opened her palms, and then two rays of sword light condensed within them. In an instant, the two rays of sword light flew out, and everywhere they passed, they tore through everything. Anlanxiu suddenly tossed her spear towards the distance. The spear carried an extremely powerful force as it tore through the air, and everywhere it passed, space was torn apart and obliterated. It was an extremely shocking sight. Wuxia didn't stand by idly either. At the instant that Yi Xian attacked, the old man behind him suddenly transformed into a ray of black light that flew out, and the black light carried an explosive force that could destroy the world. At this moment, Yi Xian's group of 4 didn't hold back at all. They didn't dare to hold back at all. Because the person they were facing might be an expert at the life-destruction realm. None of them dared to be careless at all. In the sky above Tianjiang City. Rumble. A shocking explosion suddenly resounded. In an instant, the entire sky above Tianjiang City turned pitch black. In that pitch-black space, countless powerful forces wreaked havoc, and one explosion after another rang out continuously. Within the city, countless people looked up at the sky. Would they win? In that pitch-black space, Yi Xian's group of 4 had already begun attacking Ji Jing in a frenzy. However, Ji Jing wasn't at a disadvantage even though he was fighting 1 against 4. On the other side, the 4 men in black still didn't make a move. However, Qiao Tian and Guan Jun were constantly on guard against these 4 people. As soon as these 4 people made a move, they would immediately attack. At this moment, not far away, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. Immeasurable sword. Once again, Yi Xian unleashed the infinite sword. In the instant that he unleashed the infinite sword, Ji Jing, who was not far away, had a drastic change in his expression. His left hand suddenly reached out in front of him, and this grasp directly grabbed a sword. Executing Heaven Sword. The moment he grabbed the Executing Heaven Sword, Shao Qi suddenly appeared behind him, and in the next moment, a sword light slashed towards the back of his head. This sword was even faster than Yi Xian's sword. Almost at the same time, a long spear suddenly pierced through the air, aiming for Ji Jing's head. At this moment, Ji Jing's expression instantly turned ferocious, and he suddenly roared, "Out!" As soon as his voice fell, a black sword suddenly flew out of his body. Boom! A black sword light vibrated out of the black sword, and in an instant, Yi Xian's group of 3 were directly pushed back. This time, the 3 of them were pushed back thousands of feet. In the distance, Yi Xian looked at Ji Jing. In front of Ji Jing, a long sword floated, and an illusory black dragon circled around the sword. The black dragon's expression was ferocious, and it was glaring at Yi Xian angrily. Ji Jing slowly closed his eyes. "You guys have successfully angered me." At this moment, he suddenly realized that he had underestimated Yi Xian's group of 4. These 4 people really had the ability to kill him if they joined forces. Even though it sounded slightly unbelievable because his cultivation far surpassed Yi Xian's group of 4, it was a fact. Ji Jing opened his palm, and then the black sword suddenly started spinning swiftly while numerous sword howls shook the surroundings. The expressions of Yi Xian's group of 4 turned solemn when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian gestured with his right hand, and the Executing Heaven sword flew back into the sword gourd. In the next moment, countless strands of sword intent seeped out from his body and surged into the sword gourd. Anlanxiu clenched the spear in her hand tightly, and the spear in her hand started to tremble. At the side, Shao Qi's expression was calm, and a strand of sword light appeared on the tip of her right finger. Mo Xie slowly clenched his fists tightly, and a formidable force was gathering within his body as well. All 4 of them were prepared to fight with their lives on the line. In the distance, Ji Jing looked at Yi Xian. "I'll kill you with a single strike." As soon as he finished speaking, the black sword in his hand suddenly flew out. The sword tore through the sky. This strike seemed like it intended to destroy the entire heaven-earth great world, and the energy contained within it caused the expressions of everyone to change. Moreover, its target was Yi Xian. Would Yi Xian be able to resist it? Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Shao Qi's group of 3 suddenly stood in front of Yi Xian. Shao Qi said, "Attack together." As soon as she finished speaking, she pointed a finger at Ji Jing from afar. In an instant, the sword light on the tip of her finger shot forward. However, it hadn't even gotten close to the black sword when it shattered into pieces and transformed into nothingness. Xiao Qi's eyes narrowed slightly when she witnessed this scene. She was just about to attack again when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Allow me." As soon as he finished speaking, he appeared before them. Yi Xian had a solemn expression on his face as he gazed at the sword that tore through the sky towards him. He didn't choose to take it head-on. Because it told him that he couldn't take it head-on, and he would definitely die if he did. The energy contained within the sword exceeded the limits of what his body could endure. What should I do? Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. When the black sword arrived over 100 m away from him, he suddenly opened his eyes and roared furiously, "Save me!" Everyone was speechless. P.S. There was a blackout in the neighborhood today. I've been waiting until now. Because the script is on the computer, I can't update it anywhere else. I'm over an hour late. Sorry. Chapter 803. Help? Everyone present was stunned. Everyone thought that Yi Xian was going to use some big move, but they did not expect Yi Xian to shout for help. Who would save him? However, when Yi Xian shouted, Zhijing stopped. He glanced around with a vigilant look on his face. He had done some research on Yi Xian before coming here. Yi Xian was not very strong, but he had a lot of people backing him. This was his evaluation of Yi Xian before coming. Of course, after fighting with Yi Xian, he found that Yi Xian was actually very strong, far stronger than he had expected. The fact that Yi Xian was able to fight against him at such a level was extremely terrifying. Of course, he was even more afraid of the people behind Yi Xian. Zhijing looked around, but there was no one around. After a while, he looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. I was just casually shouting. Zhijing narrowed his eyes. Are you messing with me? Yi Xian nodded. I am messing with you. Zhijing suddenly disappeared. Qi. A ray of black sword light tore through the field. Seeing this, Yi Xian's lips curled up slightly. In the next moment, he began to chant something. When the black sword light was about 30 meters away from him, he suddenly roared. Help! Everyone, this time, Zhijing did not stop, but he soon regretted it. When Yi Xian shouted those 3 words, a mysterious force suddenly enveloped him. At the same time, a blood-red, imprison word appeared above his head. 6 paths of mantra. Facing this powerful Zhijing, Yi Xian once again used the 6 paths of mantra as a trump card. Because the immeasurable sword and immortal slaying sword gourd were useless against him, he could only use one of the 6 paths of mantra, imprison God. What he wanted to shout was, imprison God. It could be said that he had played a small trick, and Zhijing had fallen for it. When the blood-red word, prisoner, appeared on top of Zhijing's head, his expression instantly changed. Unable to move. Zhijing looked at Yi Xian in horror. You are, Yi Xian suddenly roared, brothers, kill him. Although he had used the 6 paths of truth to imprison Zhijing, it was extremely strenuous. It was obvious that Zhijing's strength was much higher than his. He could not imprison him for long. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Xiao Qi and the other 2 came back to their senses. In the next moment, the 3 of them rushed out. Zhijing's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he intended to resist. However, he noticed to his astonishment that his acupoint seemed to have been sealed, and he wasn't able to mobilize any energy at all. What divine art was this? Without any hesitation, Zhijing roared, attack. Hearing Zhijing's words, the 4 black-clothed men nearby made their move. However, Qiao Tian and Guan Jun also made their moves the moment they made their move. They joined forces to stop the 4 black-clothed men. Meanwhile, Anlanxio's group of 3 had appeared before Zhijing. Ji Jing's eyes almost split apart from rage. No. As soon as he finished speaking. Bang! A world-shaking explosion suddenly resounded, and Yi Xian retreated explosively in the distance. As he retreated, he spat out mouthfuls of blood repeatedly, and he only stopped after moving almost 3 kilometers back. As soon as he stopped, Yi Xian collapsed to the ground. But right at this moment, a hand caught him, and it was Enlancio. At this moment, Enlancio's face was pale as a sheet, and there was blood on the corner of her mouth. Yi Xian gazed at Enlancio and spoke in a trembling voice, "Is he dead?" Enlancio fell silent. Yi Xian looked back. Not far away, Ji Jing was still there. However, only his soul was left. Not only that, his soul was extremely illusory, like a wisp of smoke. It seemed a gust of wind could blow it away. Ji Jing stared fixedly at Yi Xian. What divine ability was that? You. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly leaped up. In the next moment, the executioner sword in his hand transformed into the soul-suppressing sword, and then he pointed it towards Ji Jing from afar. Ji Jing's soul shook violently, and then it transformed into a ray of black light that entered the soul-suppressing sword. Bang! The soul-suppressing sword shook violently, and then a strand of formidable force surged out from within it. Yi Xian instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Ji Jing vanish completely. If he wanted to kill, then he had to kill thoroughly. What was the point of chatting? There were many times when people died from talking too much. Yi Xian gazed at Enlancio. Go help them. Enlancio nodded lightly, and then she vanished on the spot with her spear in hand. In midair, Yi Xian's eyes slowly closed. At this moment, he felt extremely weak, and it was like his spirit, energy, and essence had been completely sucked dry. Moreover, he'd noticed a problem now, and that was that the 6 paths of truth consumed a great deal of his strength. Especially at a time like this when the opponent was extremely strong, the consumption was something that his body found difficult to endure. If it wasn't for Enlancio's group of 3, then he wouldn't have been able to kill the opponent even if he used the 6 paths of truth. Because he'd noticed that even though he'd trapped Ji Jing, it was difficult for him to kill the opponent. If it wasn't for Enlancio's group of 3, then he would be the one dead. Because he wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Seeking victory amidst danger. Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts, drank 2 bottles of Spring of Life, and started to recuperate. Even though Ji Jing was dead, the matter wasn't over. An hour later, Yi Xian's body had more or less recovered. Meanwhile, Enlancio's group had killed 3 of the 4 black-clothed men, leaving 1 alive. Yi Xian arrived in front of the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man was like a shadow, and it was extremely strange. Yi Xian looked at the black-clothed man, his face expressionless. Who are you? In the current 4-dimensional universe, the known powerful forces were the dual realm sky, deity's Templar, and the life-forbidden zone. However, the people in front of him clearly didn't belong to those 3 forces. In other words, besides those 3 forces, there were even more powerful forces. The black-clothed man said, "Can I live if I tell you?" Yi Xian nodded, "I can." The black-clothed man fell silent. Yi Xian said indifferently, "It seems like you don't want to live anymore." The black-clothed man suddenly said, "Sword sect." Sword sect. Yi Xian was stunned, then he asked, "Sword sect? You are from the sword sect?" The black-clothed man said, "Yes." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Which sword sect?" The black-clothed man said, "Sword sect." Yi Xian walked in front of the black-clothed man and looked straight at him. "According to what I know, there are many sword sects in the 4-dimensional universe. However, the other sword sects have already been destroyed. What is your relationship with them?" The black-clothed man fell silent. Yi Xian said indifferently, "Can you be more direct? Since you want to live, then don't try to hide it from me. The black-clothed man said, our sword sect and these sword sects are of the same origin. However, everyone is doing their own thing. Of the same origin. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, is your ancestor a man wearing a green robe? The black-clothed man nodded, yes. Yi Xian went silent for a moment, then said, why did you come to find me? Is it just because of the fifth-dimensional treasure? The black-clothed man shook his head, the fifth-dimensional treasure is only one of the reasons. I don't know about the other reasons. Xiaoqi suddenly asked, where is your sword sect located? The black-clothed man said, the sword mausoleum world. Yi Xian asked, why do the powers in the outside world know nothing about your sword sect? The black-clothed man fell silent. Yi Xian gazed at him and said, I don't want to ask you a second time. The black-clothed man said, because the sword mausoleum world isn't in the four-dimensional universe. It isn't in the four-dimensional universe. The expressions of everyone here instantly changed when they heard this. If it isn't in the fourth dimension, then could it be in the fifth dimension? Yi Xian gazed at the black-clothed man and said, don't tell me that your sword sect has developed to the fifth dimension. The black-clothed man shook his head and said, it isn't in the fifth dimension. However, our sword mausoleum world has broken through to the fourth dimension, and we're a step closer to the fifth dimension when compared to some powers in the fourth dimension. Yi Xian asked, so, all of you want the fifth-dimensional treasure? The black-clothed man hesitated for a moment and said, it isn't us, but someone else does. Yi Xian asked, who? The black-clothed man was just about to speak when he suddenly burst into flames, and the others hadn't even recovered from their shock when he transformed into ash. He's gone. The expressions of Enlancio and the others changed drastically. Yi Xian glanced coldly at the surroundings, but he didn't sense anything. Yi Xian asked in a low voice in his heart, Senior Sword Exalt, do you know who did this? After a short moment of silence, the Sword Exalt said, I don't. Yi Xian's expression instantly became solemn when he heard this. I don't know. Even the Sword Exalt doesn't know. Someone is trying to silence me. Meanwhile, the voice from the eighth person resounded abruptly, they're coming. They're coming? Yi Xian frowned slightly, Senior, what do you mean? The person from the eighth person smiled and said, looks like that woman behind you has encountered some sort of trouble. When he heard this, Yi Xian suddenly came to a slight understanding. They're coming. It's very likely that they're from the fifth dimension. Are those from the fifth dimension coming? Yi Xian looked up at the horizon, don't toy with me like this. I don't even understand the fourth dimension. The person from the eighth person suddenly smiled and said, looks like some people can't help it. By the way, do you know the true use of this pagoda? The true use of this pagoda? Yi Xian frowned slightly, what use? The person from the eighth person laughed and said, you really don't know. You're the pagoda master, yet you don't know the true use of this pagoda. What kind of a person are you? Yi Xian said indifferently, Senior knows? The person from the eighth person said, ask someone else. I don't want to have any karmic connection with you. You're like a jinx. Anyone who touches you will be unlucky. Motherf * cur. Yi Xian couldn't help but curse in his heart. What do you mean I'm like a jinx? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian came to the prison pagoda and found Lian Qian. Miss Lian Qian, do you have something to hide from me? Lian Qian and Yan Jia were silent. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Miss Lian Qian, it's possible that the people from the fifth dimension have already started to act against me. Are you sure you want to continue hiding it from me? Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian, are you sure you want to know? Yi Xian said, do you think I'll be fine even if I don't know? If that's the case, then don't tell me. Lian Qian was silent for a moment before sighing, actually, this pagoda is a key. Key. Chapter 804. A key. Yi Xian frowned. What do you mean? Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. Do you know what was Master's previous identity? The master of the prison pagoda. Yi Xian shook his head. I don't know. Lian Qian said, Master was once known as a prophet in the fifth dimension. Even the masters of the fifth dimension had to kneel and pay respect to Master. Yi Xian frowned. Pay respect to Master? Lian Qian nodded, a trace of worship in her eyes. You can't imagine how respected Master was in the fifth dimension. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Miss Lian Qian, don't tell me that your Master was framed, died, and then escaped from the prison pagoda. This is too melodramatic. Lian Qian shook her head. If Master didn't want to die, no one could kill him. Even if the undying giants of the fifth dimension joined hands, they still couldn't kill Master. As for why Master disappeared, us sisters don't know. We only know that he disappeared very suddenly, and 100 years after he disappeared, the people of the fifth dimension began to covet the treasures he left behind. Yi Xian asked, Prison pagoda? Lian Qian said in a deep voice, not only the prison pagoda, what those people really care about is the universal library that Master created. Yi Xian frowned. Universal library? A bookstore? Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. That is not a simple bookstore. Master's understanding of the universe is unparalleled in the entire fifth dimension. And in this study room, there were many of his writings and notes. These things were not something that any martial path mystic art could compare to. In addition, in this bookstore, there are some things that Master created. Saying this, Lian Qian slightly paused, then continued, Our Tao laws were created by Master. This Xiao Ta is the same. And we are just one of the creatures he created. Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, he suddenly realized that the master of the prison pagoda was a bit incredible. If what Lian Qian said was true, then the master of the prison pagoda could really be called a god. In his heart, perhaps the real god was like this. Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian. Master had no interest in power or longevity. He spent his entire life pursuing the true meaning of the universe and the origin of life. Before he disappeared, no one dared to be disrespectful to him. Even the masters of the fifth dimension had to be respectful when they came to our place. But after he disappeared, these people started to covet the world-dimensional bookstore that he left behind. And in order to enter the myriad-dimensional book house, one must have this Xiao Ta. Without this Xiao Ta, no one can enter. This is because the myriad-dimensional book house has a restriction that the owner left behind. And that restriction, even after several tens of thousands of years, no one can harm it in the slightest. Yi Xian said solemnly, What kind of books are there in this universal library? Lian Qian said softly, I don't know much because I was very playful when I was young and didn't care about these things. It was only after I grew up that I realized what I missed out on. Speaking up to this point, her expression became somewhat bitter. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Then why did he disappear? Lian Qian shook her head. I don't know. However, I can be sure that in the fifth dimension, no one can kill Master. Even the master of the three swords at the top of the pagoda can't kill Master. Of course, if Master wants to kill those three, I'm afraid it will be difficult. In any case, I can't say for sure because I'm not very clear about the true strength of the master of the three swords at the top of the pagoda. Moreover, I'm not very clear about Master's strength because I haven't seen him fight. I only know that even the masters of the fifth dimension were very respectful in front of Master. They didn't even dare to speak loudly. Saying this, she looked at Yi Xian. Master definitely won't die. Unless he wants to die. The master of the three swords at the top of the pagoda. Yi Xian had the most contact with the plain-dressed woman. How strong was she? He didn't even have an idea. Did he think that she could kill anyone with one sword? At this time, Lian Qian suddenly said, I only know that before Master disappeared, he was studying the path of reincarnation. Reincarnation? Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. What do you mean? Lian Qian said in a deep voice, Master liked to study. Before he disappeared, I remember he was studying the path of reincarnation. Moreover, he wrote 2 books about reincarnation. I think they were called Reincarnation and Cause and Effect and Past Life and Present Life. However, before he finished writing them, he disappeared. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, after he disappeared, didn't you go to his study room to take a look? Lian Qian shook her head. We couldn't go in. Only this Xiao Ta could go in. And this broken pagoda, at that time, was leading us around blindly. In fact, the real reason was that we thought Master would come back soon. However, we didn't expect that he would disappear completely. Yi Xian was silent for a moment. Then, he said, in other words, this broken pagoda is also very, very precious in the 5th dimension, right? Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. In the 5th dimension, there is nothing that can compare with Master's universal library. There are rumors in the 5th dimension that inside Master's universal library, there is the true meaning of the universe, the true meaning of life, the end of the martial path. Yi Xian spread his hands. Then, the only way to enter is in my hands, right? Lian Qian nodded. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Miss Lian Qian, I really don't understand why this pagoda would come to the 4th dimension. Moreover, it just happened to fall into my hands. Is this just a coincidence? Lian Qian was silent. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Tell me your opinion. Lian Qian said softly, it might not be a coincidence. Yi Xian asked, why? Lian Qian said, when those people wanted to make a move on Master's universal library, we let this Xiao Ta escape. It also knows how to escape. It is basically impossible for others to come to the 4th dimension, but this broken pagoda can travel between the 4th and 5th dimensions at will. Yi Xian asked again, why? Lian Qian said, because the restriction between the 5th dimension and the 4th dimension was set by Master. And this broken pagoda is not only the key to the universal library, but also the key to the 5th dimension. Speaking of this, she looked at Yi Xian. The reason why that plain-dressed woman didn't barge into the 5th dimension is because if she did, she would have to face the power set by Master. And at that time, you will be in the most danger. That should be what she's worried about. Yi Xian thought about it and said, actually, I can use this pagoda to bring her into the 5th dimension. And then? Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. She will definitely have no problem going into the 5th dimension. What about you? Will it be a problem for you? Or do you want her to protect you for a lifetime? To stay by your side every single day? Yi Xian went silent. Lian Qian said, compared to the 5th dimension, the 4th dimension is safer for you, isn't it? Yi Xian said in a low voice, but the 5th dimension has already started to act against me. Lian Qian went silent for a moment and said, like what the 8th poster said, the plain-dressed woman might have encountered something. Speaking of this, she raised her head and looked at the boundless horizon. There was a trace of confusion in her eyes. Things are getting worse. A moment later, Yi Xian said in a low voice, let's not worry about the 5th dimension for now. We have to deal with the Sword Sect first. The Sword Sect. The Sword Sect had their eyes on him now, and Ji Jing was definitely not the last one. Yi Xian left the prison pagoda and called 7th, and Lanxiu, Mo Xie, Xiao Tian, and Guan Jun to the hall. It could be said that the people in the hall were currently the most powerful people in the northern region. Yi Xian looked at them, is there anything you want to say? Xiao Tian, suddenly said, you can't stay in the northern region. Everyone looked at Xiao Tian, Xiao Tian said, their target is you. If you stay in the northern region, they will come again. The northern region won't be able to take it. No, the entire Xianhuang Great World won't be able to take it. Yi Xian nodded, I know. The battle from before had nearly destroyed the entire Tianjiang city. At this moment, Seventh suddenly said, if we leave, where will we go? Yi Xian smiled, the dual world sky. Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian stood up and said softly, I want to make the waters even more chaotic. Even though the sword sect is strong, they aren't invincible. Only by going to the dual world sky can I make the waters even more chaotic and take advantage of the situation. Seventh said solemnly, will they use the northern region to threaten you? Everyone fell silent when they heard this. If the sword sect used the northern region to threaten Yi Xian, then Yi Xian would have no choice but to return. Yi Xian said, I don't have a choice. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked to the entrance of the hall and said, I must go to the dual world sky and use the pagoda of prison to throw the various powers in the fourth dimension into chaos. Because only there are experts in the dual world sky who might be able to resist the sword sect. Seventh said solemnly, we'll go with you. Yi Xian smiled, it's just right for me to draw their attention by myself. Moreover, I can escape. He had the boundless sword. It could be said that so long as he wanted to escape, then even an expert like Zijing couldn't kill him by himself. Anlanqiu suddenly asked, what about the Xianhuang Great World? Yi Xian said softly, I'll draw their attention. So long as there's sufficient firepower, then they won't care about the Xianhuang Great World. Anlanqiu's beautiful brows knit together slightly, that's too dangerous. Mo Xia nodded slightly, it's dangerous. Yi Xian smiled, it's just as dangerous if I stay here, isn't it? Seventh suddenly said, I'll go with you to draw their attention. Yi Xian shook his head, we need you here. Just as he'd said, the northern region needed experts to hold down the fort. Only when Anlanqiu and the others were here would he be able to leave at ease. Otherwise, he wouldn't even dare to leave the northern region. Meanwhile, Xiao Tian suddenly said, how are you going to draw their attention? The corners of Yi Xian's mouth raised slightly, their target is the pagoda of prison. Only the pagoda can draw their attention. When he spoke up to hear, his smile grew brighter, I'll auction the pagoda of prison. Everyone. P.S. Today is the 1st, so everyone will definitely have a lot of monthly votes. Does anyone want to vote for me? Chapter 805. Auctioning the Prison Pagoda. In the hall, everyone's expression became strange. Shao Qi suddenly said, can we still use this move? Yi Xian said with a smile, why not? Shao Qi shook his head, those people aren't stupid. You've already auctioned it once, and now it's back in your hands. Think about it, Yi Xian smiled, I'm not the one auctioning it. Shao Qi looked at Yi Xian, you mean to let Senior Sword Venerable auction it? Yi Xian nodded, yes. Hearing this, everyone understood. If Yi Xian auctioned it, those experts definitely wouldn't fall for it. They might even hate Yi Xian. One must know that Yi Xian had auctioned it once before, and now the prison pagoda was back in his hands and he was auctioning it again. Was he putting on a show? Therefore, if Yi Xian auctioned it again, he would definitely become the target of everyone. But if Sword Venerable auctioned it, the situation would be different. At this moment, Xiao Tian suddenly said, this plan is feasible. But. Saying this, she looked at Yi Xian, there's a prerequisite. That is, the sword sect can't kill you instantly. Also, the experts of the dual world sky don't fear the sword sect. They dare to go against the sword sect. Yi Xian nodded, I understand. So, we have to gamble. Gamble. Hearing Yi Xian's words, everyone's expression darkened. Obviously, Yi Xian wasn't absolutely confident. Yi Xian smiled, don't underestimate the charm of this pagoda. This is something that can lead to the 5th dimension. Many people will be tempted. Moreover, I believe that in the fourth dimension, the sword sect is definitely not the strongest. Everyone fell silent. At this moment, Xiao Tian suddenly said, I'll go with you. Yi Xian was about to speak, but Xiao Tian said, afraid that I'll drag you down? Yi Xian shook his head, of course not, but, and Lanxiu suddenly said, let Miss Xiao go with you. 7 nodded, let her go with you, we will guard this place. The reason why they allowed Xiao Tian to follow Yi Xian was not only because Xiao Tian was strong, but also because Xiao Tian was very smart and could give Yi Xian advice. Yi Xian was very impulsive at times. Seeing that everyone agreed, Yi Xian did not insist. He looked at Xiao Tian and said, all right, shall we set off tomorrow? Xiao Tian frowned. Tomorrow? Do you think the sword sect will give you that much time? Aren't you thinking too much? Saying that, she walked to Yi Xian and said, we have to set off now, because if I'm not wrong, the people from the sword sect are already on their way. We must arrive at the dual realm sky before they reach the northern region and then use the prison pagoda to attract them. Otherwise, the Xianhuang Great World is likely to face a great disaster. Yi Xian was about to speak, but Xiao Tian said, I know you want to say goodbye, but we don't have much time now. There's still a long way to go. Yi Xian thought about it and nodded, all right. Saying that, he looked at 7 and the others, I'll leave the northern region to you. Saying that, he flicked his finger and a white jade bottle appeared in front of Lanxiu and the others. Spring of Life. Guanjun also had one. Yi Xian said, this thing should be helpful to you. Lanxiu looked at Yi Xian and said, be careful. Yi Xian smiled and said, I will be very careful because I don't want to die. Lanxiu nodded slightly, we'll wait for your return. Yi Xian nodded, all of you have to be careful as well. Let me know if there's anything. Saying that, he looked at Guanjun and said, Senior Guanjun, if you want to leave, you can do so at any time. You've helped us enough, you don't owe us anything. Guanjun glanced at the Spring of Life and shook his head with a smile, I have nowhere to go anyway. Yi Xian said seriously, thank you very much. Guanjun nodded slightly, the dual realm sky is filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Don't be careless. Yi Xian nodded, understood. Saying that, he looked at everyone and said, take care. Saying that, he disappeared from the hall with Xiao Tian. He didn't bid farewell to Yi Ling. Just as Xiao Tian said, now wasn't the time to be wishy-washy. There's still a long way to go. Soon, the two of them arrived in the vast starry sky. Destination, dual realm sky. On the way, Xiao Tian suddenly said, is the sword sect's target only the world prison pagoda? Yi Xian looked at Xiao Tian and said with a smile, what do you mean? Xiao Tian said softly, the feeling they give me is that they don't only want the pagoda, but also you. Yi Xian nodded, indeed, they don't only want the pagoda. Xiao Tian's face sank, then this matter won't be so easy to deal with. Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian and said, why do they want to target you? Yi Xian shook his head. This was also what he wanted to know. The sword sect. In fact, he had a deep relationship with the sword sect. Along the way, he had encountered several sword sect, especially when he was the sect leader of one of the sword sect. In all fairness, he did not want to become enemies with the sword sect. However, he was also very clear that although these sword sect had a deep relationship with each other, they had their own way of doing things. To put it simply, some sword sect might be his friend, but some sword sect might be his enemy. Of course, he was also curious about how many sword sect there were, and the founder of these sword sect was the same person. Yi Xian shook his head, no matter what, this sword sect was definitely an enemy. Xiao Tian suddenly said, what we need to do now is to find out the real strength of this sword sect. Yi Xian thought about it and nodded. I'll contact the temple. Saying that, he took out a voice transmission stone, and a moment later, a voice came from the stone. What is it? Zhu Xiao's voice. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Zhu, I thought you wouldn't accept it. Zhu Xiao said indifferently, if you have something to say, then say it. Yi Xian did not joke around and said seriously, Miss Zhu, I already know the origins of those who chased after me. They are all from a force called the Sword Sect, and this force is in some sword ruins world. Does the temple know about them? After a moment of silence, Zhu Xiao said, we have also just found out a little bit. This organization is extremely mysterious, and they have never appeared in the fourth dimension before. At least, they have not appeared in the past 10,000 years. But 10,000 years ago, they appeared once, and at that time, they seemed to be looking for someone. After that, they did not appear again. At this point, she paused and then said, you must be extremely careful. Although this force rarely appears in the eyes of the world, their strength is definitely very, very terrifying. And they still dared to come after you even after knowing that plain-dressed woman is behind you. This is enough to prove that they are not afraid of the plain-dressed woman behind you. At this time, Lian Qian's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. It might not be because they are not afraid, but it might be because they are ignorant. Ignorant. Lian Qian's strength might not be especially strong, but her knowledge was not something an ordinary person could compare to. She knew how strong the experts of the fifth dimension were. Therefore, she compared the plain-clothed woman to them. In the end, even if the plain-clothed woman reached the fifth dimension, she would still be at the peak. Perhaps, only the legendary ancient existences of the fifth dimension would be able to contend against her. And in the fourth dimension, the only ones who could fight against the plain-dressed woman were the owners of the other two swords. But from the looks of it, those two swords were also inextricably linked to Yi Xian. At this time, Zhu Xiao's voice sounded in front of Yi Xian's voice again. As for other information about this sword sect, we are still investigating. If there is any, I will inform you. Yi Xian said solemnly, many thanks. Zhu Xiao did not say anything else. Yi Xian kept the voice transmission stone and looked up at the end of the starry sky. The road ahead is not going to be easy. Qiao Tianer looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled slightly, but I have no choice. Miss Qiao, let's go. Soon, the two disappeared into the boundless starry sky. Dual Realm Sky. The closer they got to Dual Realm Sky, the closer Yi Xian knew he was to the fifth dimension. The fifth dimension. Actually, he was also very curious about the fifth dimension. After all, it was a world higher than the fourth dimension. He also wanted to see what kind of world it was. Of course, he did not want to go there. He really did not want to live a life of being hunted. 2 days later, Yi Xian and Xiao Tianer were getting closer to Dual Realm Sky. During this time, the two did not encounter any threats. No one from the sword sect came to stop them. But because of this, the two were even more cautious. On the way, Xiao Tianer suddenly said, we can ask Temple to help us release the news. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Tianer, auction the World Prison Pagoda? Xiao Tianer. Yi Xian hesitated, then said, isn't it too early? Xiao Tianer shook her head, don't underestimate the experts in the Dual Realm Sky. If I'm not wrong, they already know you're here, but they may not know why you're here. So, we have to let them know now. Only then will they temporarily give up on targeting you. Yi Xian thought about it, then nodded, okay. Then, he took out the voice transmission stone and sent a message to Zhu Xiao. Zhu Xiao did not reject this favor and agreed immediately. Soon, the news that Yi Xian had come to Dual Realm Sky to auction the fifth dimension treasure spread quickly. Of course, Temple said that Venerable Sword would be selling it, while Yi Xian was only there to help. Many people knew that with Yi Xian's arrival, Dual Realm Sky would not be peaceful anymore. In an unknown star region, two women were slowly walking. The two of them were walking very quickly. During this time, the two of them had passed through countless mysterious black holes. One of them was Lian. Finally, after passing through one of the black holes, the woman next to Lian stopped and looked into the distance. We're almost there. Just as Elaine was about to speak, a white furry little fellow was waving her claws in a rhythmic manner as if she was practicing martial arts. At the same time, she was humming, ha. Humph. 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 The woman next to Lian smiled. She's practicing a martial arts from Lian Shuang's hometown. I forgot what it's called. Martial arts? Lian looked at the woman next to her. What martial arts? The woman smiled. Lian Shuang's hometown. She's very obsessed with it. Lian Shuang. Lian shook her head and smiled. She looked at the little fellow in the distance, and the little fellow looked at her as well. In the next moment, the little fellow's eyes lit up, and then she flew towards Lian. In next to no time, the little fellow flew over to Lian, and then she rubbed her forehead against Lian's chin intimately. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded behind Lian, "You're here?" Hearing this, Lian's body trembled slightly. Chapter 806. The Dual Realm Sky. The Dual Realm Sky was a world created by countless experts. More accurately, it was a passageway that led to the fifth dimension. In order to open this passageway, the Dual Realm Sky had sacrificed generations of experts. Thus, the Dual Realm Sky was also known as the Dual Realm Graveyard. This was the final resting place of countless experts in the fourth dimension. Many experts from the fourth dimension eventually reached this place and fell here. Generation after generation of experts repeated this cycle, falling into an endless cycle. Until now, no one had reached the fifth dimension. The fifth dimension. This was the hope of countless experts, but it was also this place that made them despair. Over the years, how many amazing people had ended up turning into dust after coming to this place? And now, a treasure from the fifth dimension had appeared in the fourth dimension. The prison pagoda. With this item, one could easily enter the fifth dimension. These experts, who were already on the verge of despair, could not help but have a spark of hope ignite in their hearts. Without external items? Using one's own strength to enter the fifth dimension? Only those who had not experienced despair would think this way. For many experts who had experienced despair, the prison pagoda was their last hope. The appearance of the prison pagoda was like a drowning man seeing a piece of driftwood. Moreover, this prison pagoda came from the fifth dimension. It was also the only way for experts from the fourth dimension to understand the fifth dimension. Somewhere in the clouds, Yi Xian and Xiao Tian were walking slowly. Not far in front of them, about 1,000 zhang away, there was an illusory door. The gate of the dual realm. After passing through this door, one would arrive at the dual realm sky. The threshold for this door was very high. One had to be at least an earth immortal to enter. But recently, this door had been opened wide. Next to Yi Xian, Xiao Tian said softly, "It seems that the experts of the dual realm sky welcome you." Yi Xian smiled. "I did not come empty-handed." Xiao Tian looked at Yi Xian. "Once you enter this door, you will either live or die. Have you thought it through?" Yi Xian stopped and asked, "What if I don't enter this door?" Xiao Tian smiled. "Still the same." Yi Xian rolled his eyes. "Then why did you ask?" Xiao Tian sized up Yi Xian with a complicated look in her eyes. "Do you want to hear what I think of you?" Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Xiao Tian said, "Ever since I started investigating you, I discovered something very interesting. Yi Xian was a little curious. What interesting thing? Qiao Tian said, your entire life has been spent either in battle or on the path to battle. Yi Xian was speechless. Qiao Tianer suddenly shook her head and smiled. You've been living a hard life. Yi Xian sighed softly. Isn't it tough? I was almost killed by you back then. Qiao Tian smiled. You don't hate me? Yi Xian smiled and said, of course I hated you at first, but now you are my friend, right? Friends. Qiao Tianer smiled. Friends? Yi Xian asked, aren't we? Qiao Tianer looked at Yi Xian. In this world, the people who can defeat you are often your closest people and your friends. Yi Xian said with a smile, but in this world, the people who can motivate and help you are usually the people closest to you and your friends, aren't they? Qiao Tianer smiled. You have a good mentality. As they spoke, the two arrived in front of the heavenly gate. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Qiao, if you leave now, you might still be able to make it. Qiao Tianer glanced at Yi Xian. Are you going to stir up some feelings for me now? Yi Xian laughed and then walked into the two-realm gate with Qiao Tianer. No one stopped them. Soon, the two appeared in a spatial tunnel, the end of which could not be seen. Behind them, the two-realm gate was closed. At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of the two. The old man was thin and could be described as skinny. His back was slightly hunched and his eyes were somewhat gloomy. He did not give off a good feeling. The old man stared at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, Senior, you are? The old man said in a hoarse voice, can you let me see the fifth-dimensional treasure? I will just take a look, I will definitely not snatch it. Yi Xian said with a smile, of course. As soon as he finished speaking, Sword Venerable appeared beside him. Sword Venerable looked at the old man and said, you want to see? The old man looked at Sword Venerable and grinned, revealing his yellow teeth. Sword Venerable. I am not afraid of you. As soon as he finished speaking, Sword Venerable suddenly attacked. A cold light arrived first. The old man suddenly clenched his right hand lightly, and with this clench, he directly grasped that wisp of sword light. However, at this moment, another sword light slashed over. The old man held the sword light and blasted it forward. Boom! The sword light exploded. Sword Venerable and the old man both retreated 10 feet. The yellow-toothed old man looked at Sword Venerable and smiled sinisterly. Sword Venerable, you don't seem to have made any progress. Sword Venerable was expressionless. Yellow-toothed old man, after we leave, shall we fight to the death? Fight to the death. The yellow-toothed old man slowly clenched his right hand. Sword Venerable, my goal is only that fifth-dimensional treasure. Sword Venerable looked at the yellow-toothed old man. Do you have the ability to take it? The yellow-toothed old man narrowed his eyes and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, you just want to see? The yellow-toothed old man looked at Yi Xian. Can I? Yi Xian smiled. Of course I can. As he said this, he looked at Sword Venerable. Sword Venerable said with profound chi, this person is not easy to deal with. You must be careful. Yi Xian nodded. I will. Sword Venerable nodded. Be careful. As he said this, he returned to the prison pagoda. In truth, he had only come out to let others know that the person auctioning the prison pagoda was him, Sword Venerable. After Sword Venerable disappeared, Yi Xian looked at the yellow-toothed old man and smiled. Then, he opened his palm and the prison pagoda appeared in his hand. The yellow-toothed old man's eyes instantly locked onto the prison pagoda. Yi Xian loosened his hand and the prison pagoda flew in front of the yellow-toothed old man. The latter was stunned. Xiao Tian glanced at Yi Xian, not saying anything. Yi Xian smiled. You can have a good look. The yellow-toothed old man hesitated for a moment. Then, he grasped the prison pagoda. The prison pagoda slightly trembled. After a moment, the yellow-toothed old man's expression gradually became solemn. After a long time, the yellow-toothed old man looked at Yi Xian. Aren't you afraid I'll snatch it away? Yi Xian smiled. If you like it, then feel free to take it away. The yellow-toothed old man looked deeply at Yi Xian. Young man, you are very bold and decisive. No wonder you can live until now. With that, he pointed with a finger, and the prison pagoda flew back in front of Yi Xian. He naturally wouldn't snatch the prison pagoda. Because if he did, he would become the target of everyone. It was easy to take it away, but the biggest problem was what would happen after it was taken away. He might be alive to take it, but he wouldn't be alive to use it. The yellow-toothed old man glanced at Yi Xian once more, and then he turned and left. Xiao Tian, who was beside Yi Xian, said softly, he knows his limits. Yi Xian smiled. They all know that it's a hot potato. A hot potato. Many people wanted the pagoda, but they weren't stupid. They all knew that it was a hot potato, and whoever took it would suffer misfortune. However, they wouldn't give up. Therefore, it wasn't Yi Xian who was in a difficult position, but the powerhouses of the dual realm sky. After a while, Yi Xian and Xiao Tian continued forward. This time, no one came out to stop them. About an hour later, the two of them reached the end of the path. As a white light enveloped Yi Xian and Xiao Tian, the two of them completely disappeared. Before long, Yi Xian and Xiao Tian arrived in front of a city. The city wasn't big. From its size, it looked like a small city. Moreover, the city was rather simple. It was made of stones and was very simple. Dual Realm City. Yi Xian and Xiao Tian walked towards Two Realm City. As soon as they arrived at the city gate, a woman suddenly walked towards them from afar. The woman was wearing a long black dress, and her long hair was draped over her shoulders. As she walked, she was calm and had an elegant temperament. The woman quickly walked up to Yi Xian and Xiao Tian and smiled. Gentlemen, let me introduce myself. I am Shi Ziqing, a businessman. A businessman. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Shi, are you here to buy a pagoda? Shi Ziqing shook her head and smiled. Emperor Yi, you must be joking. How can we afford such a divine item? This time, I came to look for King Yi because I want to do business with him. Yi Xian asked, what business? Shi Ziqing smiled. Isn't Emperor Yi going to auction that divine item? We happen to have a place, and we can also organize a large auction for Emperor Yi. After all, auctioning such a divine item requires a large venue. Apart from that, we can also provide some help to Emperor Yi within our capabilities. For example, Emperor Yi has just arrived here and is not familiar with this place. We can help Emperor Yi quickly understand this place. I think this is what Emperor Yi needs right now. Yi Xian nodded. What you say makes sense. What do I have to pay? Shi Ziqing smiled. Emperor Yi, shall we enter the city to discuss in detail? Yi Xian nodded. All right. Shi Ziqing looked around and cupped her fists. Everyone, the dreamy cloud chamber of commerce has no other intentions. We simply want to cooperate with Emperor Yi and help him auction this item. I hope that everyone can give the dreamy cloud chamber of commerce some face. There was no response. Shi Ziqing smiled. Thank you very much. After saying that, she looked at Yi Xian. Emperor Yi, please. Yi Xian nodded. Just like that, Yi Xian and Xiao Tian walked into the city. The streets of the city were very, very deserted because there were only the three of them. Yi Xian asked, "Is there usually no one here?" Shi Ziqing smiled. "There are very few people because they are all very busy. Of course, there are relatively more people now. However, none of them have shown themselves. Emperor Yi understands." Yi Xian smiled. "Understood." After saying that, he paused. "Which power is the strongest here now?" Shi Ziqing thought for a moment, then said, "It's hard to say. Moreover, to correct Emperor Yi, the people here basically fight alone. There are very few who join forces. Moreover, everyone's goal is the fifth dimension, so there are very few conflicts of interest. Of course, things are different now." As she said that, she looked at Yi Xian. Emperor Yi has a precious treasure and is the target of everyone's attention. Therefore, Emperor Yi must be mentally prepared. Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. Do you have tickets? Chapter 807. Mentally prepared. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "I'm already mentally prepared." Before coming here, he understood what this trip entailed. This was like a sheep entering a pack of wolves. But he had no choice. Of course, he could choose to escape. With the immeasurable sword, even the sword sect would find it difficult to find him. But the problem was that he could not escape. If these people couldn't find him, they would definitely target the people around him. At that time, these experts would not care about the pride of the strong. He could only attract their attention. Soon, the three arrived at the city center. In front of Yi Xian's group was a circular building. This building was like a circle, without a roof, and one could see the sky. On both sides, there were private rooms. Yi Xian glanced around. This place was very spacious. Coupled with the layout of the place, it was very suitable for holding an auction. Shi Ziqing smiled, "King Yi, knowing that you were coming, we specially cleaned this place. Are you satisfied?" Yi Xian looked at Shi Ziqing. "Miss Shi, can your dreamy cloud commerce guarantee my safety?" Shi Ziqing shook her head. "Sorry, no. King Ye's situation is special, and this place is also very special. We cannot guarantee anyone's safety, including our own." Yi Xian asked softly, "Is it that dangerous?" Shi Ziqing smiled. "This is the safest place in the four-dimensional universe, but it is also the most dangerous place in the four-dimensional universe. King Yi, when are you planning to auction it?" Yi Xian said with a smile, "Can we promote it?" Shi Ziqing said solemnly, "As far as we know, those who should have come are already here. Now, everyone is waiting for you." Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Shi, are you also waiting?" Shi Ziqing looked at Yi Xian. "King Yi, we want to know some things about Dao Yi, but we have no interest in this tower. Although this thing is good, it is not something that ordinary people can enjoy." Yi Xian nodded. 3 days. 3 days from now, how about it?" Shi Ziqing hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right. We will fight for 3 days for King Yi, but we can only fight for 3 days, because I'm afraid many people can't wait any longer. Please forgive us, King Yi." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand. Thank you." He knew very well that there were many people paying attention to him. These people would not give him too much time. Shi Ziqing nodded slightly, then turned and left. Only Yi Xian and Xiao Tian'er were left. Xiao Tian'er looked at Yi Xian. "The situation might be worse than we thought." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I have already thought of the worst outcome." Xiao Tian'er fell silent. Yi Xian took out the transmission stone, which vibrated slightly. A moment later, Zhu Xie's voice sounded from the transmission stone. "I've received news that the sword sect's people have arrived at the dual realm sky. Be careful. Here it comes." Yi Xian put away the prison pagoda and looked at Xiao Tian'er. Miss Xiao, remember, no matter what happens, don't interfere. He knew very well that the people he was about to face were not people Xiao Tian'er could fight against. If Xiao Tian'er made a move, she would die without a doubt. Xiao Tian'er was silent. Naturally, she understood this as well. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and took out a storage ring. This was the storage ring of the blood ancestor. Yi Xian smiled and said, Miss Xiao, you are very knowledgeable. Do you have a way to open this ring? Xiao Tian'er walked to Yi Xian and took the ring. After a moment, she said softly, this storage ring has a restriction. Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Xiao Tian'er studied it for a long time, then shook her head. I can't. Yi Xian was somewhat helpless. The blood ancestor's storage ring must have many good things, but he just couldn't open it. This made his heart itch. Xiao Tian'er returned the storage ring to Yi Xian. Why do you need 3 days? Yi Xian smiled and said, I want to delay it for a while. Xiao Tian'er looked at Yi Xian. Is there a way to contact the woman in the plain dress? In this situation, only the woman in the plain dress could help. Yi Xian shook his head. The woman in the plain dress? He hadn't seen her for a long time. Xiao Tian'er's face darkened. Yi Xian smiled and said, it's fine. We can't rely on her for everything, can we? Xiao Tian'er looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. Suddenly, she realized that Yi Xian was actually quite miserable. Not only were there more and more enemies, but they were also getting stronger. The enemies he was facing now were all peak experts in the four-dimensional universe. In addition, the five-dimensional universe was also eyeing him covetously. Xiao Tian'er shook her head. What did you do in your previous life? Yi Xian, Xiao Tian'er said, I'm going to familiarize myself with Two-Realm City. Be careful. After saying that, she disappeared on the spot. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Absorb. He had not completely digested the ancient books he had obtained from the shrine. What he needed to do now was to completely digest them. Of course, he couldn't rush it. In any case, he would digest as much as he could. Time passed bit by bit. The auction in 3 days was getting closer and closer. During this time, the entire Two-Realm City was very, very peaceful. No one came to cause trouble for Yi Xian. It was unbelievably peaceful. The next night, Shi Ziqing came to Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Is King Yi ready? Yi Xian smiled and said, I'm ready. Shi Ziqing nodded. Before the auction, we want to have a chat with King Yi. Yi Xian smiled slightly. What do you want to talk about? Shi Ziqing said, we want to understand that treasure and the five-dimensional universe. Of course, in return, we can provide some help to King Yi. Yi Xian asked, what kind of help? Shi Ziqing said in a deep voice, for example, we can tell King Yi which experts are here, how strong they are, who poses the greatest threat to King Yi, and so on. Yi Xian shook his head. To me, these are all empty words. My enemy is everyone, and all of them pose a great threat to me. Shi Ziqing was silent. Yi Xian said, Miss Shi, I need you to help me investigate the Sword Sect. Sword Sect. Shi Ziqing looked at Yi Xian. You know about the Sword Sect? Yi Xian smiled. It seems that Miss Shi also knows about the Sword Sect. Shi Ziqing said in a deep voice, they're here too? Yi Xian nodded. I received news that they're already here. Shi Ziqing sighed and did not say anything. Yi Xian said, what's wrong? Shi Ziqing said in a soft voice, I didn't expect that the Sword Sect would also come out. This Sword Sect, in this four-dimensional universe, currently has dozens of known sections. These dozens of sword sect are from the same branch, and their founder is also the same person. However, they each do their own things and basically do not contact each other. And the strongest sword sect is the one in the Sword Ruins realm. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, "How strong is it?" Shi Ziqing glanced at Yi Xian and did not say anything. Yi Xian smiled. "Say it, I can bear it." Shi Ziqing said in a soft voice, "Very strong, to the point of being unreasonable." Yi Xian did not say anything. Shi Ziqing looked at Yi Xian and said, "As far as I know, there are 2 super experts behind King Yi. If those 2 women come out, they might be able to resist the sword sect. As for King Yi himself." Saying this, she paused and then said, "For the time being, there is no way to resist them. Of course, King Yi is a genius, and in the future, he will not lose to anyone. But now, King Yi is still too young, and he needs more time." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Miss She really knows how to talk." Shi Ziqing said in a deep voice, "King Yi wants to know about the sword sect?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." Shi Ziqing was about to say something, but suddenly, she frowned. "They're here." Just as her voice fell, streams of divine senses suddenly appeared in the surroundings, but very quickly, these divine senses disappeared. Yi Xian looked around and asked, "Who?" Shi Ziqing said in a deep voice, "The 3 brothers of the Shui family are triplets, and their minds are interlinked, and they are very powerful. When the 3 of them join forces, they are very powerful." Yi Xian said with a smile, "There should be a lot of people, right?" Shi Ziqing nodded. "A lot. We might have to bring it forward." Yi Xian nodded. "Then bring it forward." Shi Ziqing suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian. She looked straight at Yi Xian and said with a Xian Qi voice transmission, "King Yi, you should be very clear about your situation. This auction might not be very smooth. If you want to smoothly complete it, the premise is that King Yi has enough strength. If not, something unexpected might happen, because some people will not care about rules with King Yi. This, King Yi must understand." Yi Xian said, "You mean, someone might kill me?" Shi Ziqing nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian was silent. Shi Ziqing looked at Yi Xian, "King Yi, do you have a backup plan?" Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, "Wait a moment." After saying that, he disappeared. Prison Pagoda. After Yi Xian returned to the prison pagoda, he went directly to the 8th floor. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, do you want to make a deal?" The 8th floor smiled and said, "No. In fact, I want you to die more than anyone else, but I can't kill you with my own hands." "That's not right, I don't dare to kill you." He really did not dare to kill Yi Xian. Kill Yi Xian, seize the treasure of the 5th dimension. This karma was too great. Even a powerhouse of his level couldn't withstand it. Therefore, he needed to borrow the hands of others to kill Yi Xian. He could see the karma on Yi Xian, but this expert of the 4th dimension could not. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "Senior, if I die, it might not be good for you." The 8th floor smiled and said, "Why?" Yi Xian smiled faintly, "If I die, this pagoda will be ownerless." The 8th floor said, "Ownerless? At that time, do you think those ants outside can compete with me?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "They can't compete with you, but is Senior invincible?" The 8th floor smiled and said, "Are you talking about the girl in the plain dress behind you? Don't worry, if you die, after I obtain this pagoda, I will immediately return to the 5th dimension." Yi Xian shook his head, "It's not her, Senior seems to have forgotten. There is another existence inside this pagoda. The 9th floor." At this point, Yi Xian grinned and said, "Senior, do you think the 9th floor is the same as you think? If I die, you will obtain this item, then he will kill you. In the end, he will not be touched by any karma. Do you think it is possible? The 8th floor was silent. Chapter 808. The 8th floor's goal was clear, it was the mantis stalking the cicada. He didn't want to kill Yi Xian, or in other words, he didn't dare to. Because he was wary of the person behind Yi Xian. However, he didn't want to give up on the pagoda. The best way was to let someone else kill Yi Xian, then he would kill the person. That way, the treasure would be in his hands and the karma wouldn't be tainted. However, just like what Yi Xian said, he neglected one thing. That was, there was a 9th floor inside the pagoda. Did the 9th floor wake up? This was a question worth thinking about. Yi Xian smiled, "Senior, I have a better idea, do you want to hear it?" The 8th floor, let's hear it. Yi Xian smiled, "There is another way, give the pagoda to someone else and kill them. That way, you won't be tainted either. Plus, if I don't die, the person behind me won't come after you." The 8th floor, the question is, are you really willing to give it up? Yi Xian shrugged, "Do I have a better choice?" The 8th floor was silent. If Yi Xian gave it up, then Yi Xian would have nothing to do with the pagoda. Yi Xian continued, "Senior, you want the pagoda, not my death, am I right?" The 8th floor, "I have no grudge against you, why would I want you dead?" Yi Xian nodded, "If that's the case, there's no need for us to be enemies, am I right?" The 8th floor, "Are you really willing to give up the pagoda? You should know what it means." Yi Xian smiled, "Is your life more important, or the pagoda?" The 8th floor, "Of course it's my life. As long as I'm alive, I have limitless possibilities." Yi Xian, "Isn't that right?" The 8th floor was silent for a moment, then tell me, why should I help you? Even if I don't help you, you still have to give it up, am I right? Yi Xian said softly, "It depends on whether Senior is willing to form a good relationship with me or not." The 8th floor was silent. About a quarter of an hour later, the 8th person suddenly said, "I'll help you once." Yi Xian smiled and said, "It's enough." With that, he left the World Prison Pagoda. Outside the pagoda, Shi Ziqing looked at Yi Xian. "Is Prince Yi ready?" Yi Xian nodded. "It's done." Shi Ziqing nodded. "That's good." With that, she clapped her hands lightly. Behind her, 2 experts suddenly appeared. They bowed slightly to Shi Ziqing before disappearing. Shi Ziqing said, "Emperor Yi, one last matter. My dreamy cloud chamber of commerce would like to understand the 5th dimension." Yi Xian smiled and said, "All right." As he spoke, he told them everything he knew about the 5th dimension. Of course, he didn't tell them everything. He had only revealed a few words. After a long time, Shi Ziqing looked at Yi Xian. "Can that pagoda really lead to the 5th dimension?" Yi Xian nodded. "It can." Shi Ziqing nodded slightly. "I understand." With that, she turned and looked around. "Everyone, my dreamy cloud chamber of commerce is hosting this auction. If there is any negligence, I hope that everyone will forgive me." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. "Prince Yi." Yi Xian took out the World Prison Pagoda and looked around. He smiled and said, "Everyone, I won't play any games with you. If this item stays with me, Yi Xian, it will bring me endless trouble. Today, I will hand it over. A treasure of the 5th dimension can only be obtained by those who have the ability. Today, I don't plan on auctioning it." With that, he gently placed the World Prison Pagoda on the ground. Looking at the World Prison Pagoda in his hand, Yi Xian's lips curled into an undetectable smile. The World Prison Pagoda lightly trembled, as if it was responding to something. Yi Xian lightly touched the World Prison Pagoda. Then, he looked around again. "Whoever wants it can take it." With that, he stood up and left. Seeing this, Shi Ziqing was dumbfounded. Wasn't he going to auction it? In the dark, some experts were also stunned. What kind of game was Yi Xian playing? Yi Xian left decisively. In a short while, he disappeared into the distance. Shi Ziqing looked at the world prison pagoda in front of her. After a while, Shi Ziqing turned and left. She didn't dare to take this world prison pagoda. Shi Ziqing didn't take it, and no one else did either. The world prison pagoda just sat there quietly. 2 hours passed. 4 hours passed. Still, no one moved. No one was stupid. Whoever took it first would be the one to be targeted. On the other side, Yi Xian was very leisurely. He didn't leave the two-world sky because he found that the two-world sky was completely closed. No one could leave. He didn't plan to leave either. Yi Xian found a quiet place in the city. It was a shabby hall. Next to him was Qiao Tian. Along the way, Qiao Tian was silent. Yi Xian looked at Qiao Tian. Miss Qiao, what are you thinking? Qiao Tian said softly, you're really going to hand it over this time, right? Yi Xian said with a smile, what do you think? Qiao Tian hesitated and sighed. She didn't say anything. Yi Xian smiled. It's not that simple. Qiao Tian was a little surprised. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Everyone wanted his world prison pagoda. It was fine. He might as well take it out and let everyone fight for it. Fight for it. It would be best if they fought for it. Qiao Tian looked deeply at Yi Xian. She knew that things weren't that simple. She understood Yi Xian a little since she came into contact with Yi Xian. This person wouldn't be willing to lose out no matter what he did. This time, he took the initiative to hand over the pagoda. It was definitely not that simple. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, Miss Qiao, you have to hide. Hide. Qiao Tian looked at Yi Xian. What are you going to do? Yi Xian said with a smile, do one thing. Qiao Tian said in a low voice, can't you tell me? Yi Xian looked at Qiao Tian. It's not that I don't trust you. It's for your safety. Please understand. Qiao Tian nodded. Be careful. Then, she was about to leave. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, if possible, leave the two-world sky. Qiao Tian looked at Yi Xian for a long time before nodding. Take care. Then, she turned and disappeared. After Qiao Tian left, Yi Xian was silent for a while before disappearing as well. At this moment, the world prison pagoda was still untouched. It was still there and hadn't escaped. No one dared to make the first move. The world prison pagoda was a treasure of the fifth dimension. Everyone wanted it, but no one wanted to stand out. Whoever took it first would be everyone's enemy. Thus, no one moved, but no one gave up either. The fifth dimension treasure was at their fingertips. Somewhere in the dark. Two women stood quietly, looking at the world prison pagoda in the distance. These two women were Zhu Xia and Yuan Xiaodao from Temple of Gods. Zhu Xia suddenly said, did he really give up? Yuan Xiaodao said calmly, give up? That person has a lot of tricks up his sleeves. He must be playing some tricks by doing this. Zhu Xia shook her head. These people aren't stupid. Yuan Xiaodao said, they aren't stupid, but they are greedy. As long as a person is greedy, they will easily lose their mind. As she spoke, she looked at the world prison pagoda in the distance. Let's see who will lose their mind first. As soon as Yuan Xiaodao finished speaking, an old man suddenly appeared near the world prison pagoda. The old man wore a gray robe, and his white hair was tied up high. In his left hand was a sheathed longsword wrapped in black cloth. Sword sect. Yuan Xiaodao suddenly said, looks like they can't hold it in any longer. Zhu Xia looked at the old man. The old man didn't care about the experts in the dark. He directly walked to the World Prison Pagoda and stretched out his hand to take it. At this moment, a dozen powerful auras suddenly enveloped the old man. The old man's eyes narrowed, and he lightly flicked his left thumb. Hum! A sword cry suddenly resounded, and then a sword light slashed out. Chi! A tearing sound suddenly resounded, and then the surrounding auras were completely shattered. The grey-robed old man coldly looked around. My sword sect wants this item. What high-sounding sentiments! Suddenly, a voice resounded, and then the space in the sky above the grey-robed old man was suddenly torn apart. A moment later, an enormous black palm stretched out from within that space. Bang! The space and the surroundings warped into a strange shape. The grey-robed old man glanced coldly at the enormous palm, and then he opened his palm and a sword suddenly flew out. Ohm! A sword howl resounded through the sky. Rumble! In the sky, the giant hand was suddenly split into two. However, an afterimage suddenly descended from the sky. The grey-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he stomped his right foot against the ground. Bang! The entire ground trembled violently as the grey-robed old man shot into the sky. Rumble! A world-shaking explosion suddenly resounded in the sky, and then two figures retreated repeatedly. As they retreated, countless strands of sword energy tore through the sky, and it was an extremely shocking sight. The grey-robed old man had just stopped and was about to attack again when numerous auras pressed down upon him. The grey-robed old man's face fell. He knew that he would be ganged up on if he attacked again. The grey-robed old man glanced coldly at the surroundings. Do all of you intend to become enemies with my sword sect? Now, he had no choice but to use the sword sect. The middle-aged man who fought the grey-robed old man earlier sneered, "What? Do you intend to use the sword sect to suppress us?" The grey-robed old man gazed at the middle-aged man. My sword sect is determined to obtain it. The middle-aged man smiled. Looks like you really intend to use the sword sect to suppress us. I admit that the sword sect is powerful, but if we join forces, then we might not have to fear your sword sect. The grey-robed old man's face fell when he heard this. Even the sword sect would have a huge headache if the experts of the Twin World Alliance joined forces. The grey-robed old man fell silent for a moment before he chose to turn around and leave in the end. He could only put it aside for now. At the very least, he had to wait for more experts of the sword sect to arrive. Once the grey-robed old man left, the surroundings returned to calm once more, and no one moved to touch the pagoda. On the other side, the grey-robed old man arrived in midair, and he glanced coldly down below and said, "Do you know where Yi Xian is?" A voice suddenly resounded from the side. "No. It's like he vanished into thin air." The grey-robed old man's face turned slightly gloomy. That kid sent the pagoda here with the intention of using the experts of the Twin World Alliance to keep my sword sect busy. He's extremely vicious. He can't be allowed to live. We must eliminate him. Suddenly, a sword howl resounded from below. The grey-robed old man was stunned. "One of us?" The person behind the grey-robed old man replied with a question. "He's not one of us." Right at this moment, a furious roar suddenly resounded from below. "You sword sect, how dare you!" The grey-robed old man was speechless. "P.S. I've noticed a problem. So long as I want monthly passes, then my heart will be tied down, and I won't be able to attain freedom. So, give it to me." Chapter 809. The grey-robed old man was dumbfounded. What's going on? The grey-robed old man scanned the area with his divine sense, and at this time, a dozen powerful auras suddenly appeared around him. The gray-robed old man frowned. What's the meaning of this? Opposite the gray-robed old man, a middle-aged man slowly walked over. The middle-aged man coldly stared at the gray-robed old man. Hand over the prison pagoda. Prison pagoda? The gray-robed old man spoke in a deep voice. The old man never took the prison pagoda. The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed. You didn't take it? Was that sword chime just now fake? The gray-robed old man stared at the middle-aged man. The prison pagoda was taken. The middle-aged man smiled. It seems like your sword sect is quite good at acting. The gray-robed old man sneered. You're also a joke. You actually let someone take the pagoda under your noses. Are you all blind? The middle-aged man suddenly disappeared. The gray-robed old man drew his sword and slashed. Rumble. A loud explosion sounded. In an instant, the gray-robed old man and the middle-aged man both retreated. While retreating, the gray-robed old man pointed at the air, and a sword ray shot out from his fingertip. However, as soon as this sword ray appeared, it was instantly crushed by the dozens of powerful auras. At the same time, the dozens of powerful auras directly locked onto the gray-robed old man. The gray-robed old man's face turned gloomy. If it was a one-on-one fight, he wasn't afraid of anyone. However, if they attacked together, he absolutely couldn't win. The gray-robed old man suppressed the anger in his heart. You're so sure that my sword sect took it just because of a sword chime? In the distance, the middle-aged man spoke. Don't keep mentioning the sword sect for no reason. Do you think we're afraid of your sword sect? The gray-robed old man stared at the middle-aged man. The old man never took the pagoda. The middle-aged man's gaze gradually turned icy cold. Besides the sword cultivators of your sword sect, I truly can't think of anyone else who has the ability to silently take away this item under our noses. The gray-robed old man said, Then isn't Yi Xian also a swordsman? The middle-aged man sneered, What a joke. What realm was Yi Xian at? How could he take away that treasure in front of us without making a sound? Are you looking down on us? The gray-robed elder said, Do you think that Yi Xian is an ordinary person? The middle-aged man was expressionless. Of course he's not an ordinary person. However, I really can't think of what ability he has to be able to take this item away without us noticing. The gray-robed elder fell silent. In fact, he didn't believe that it was Yi Xian who took it, because Yi Xian definitely didn't have the ability to take it away in front of so many experts. However, his intuition told him that this matter might be related to Yi Xian. The middle-aged man said abruptly, If you don't hand it over, then this day next year might be the day you die. Killing intent. The middle-aged man's eyes were filled with undisguised killing intent. A fifth-dimensional treasure. Even the sword sect couldn't make them compromise. At this time, the middle-aged man slowly clenched his fists. In fact, if he had a choice, he also didn't want to fight with the sword sect, but he had no choice. They were determined to get their hands on that fifth-dimensional treasure. The gray-robed elder said in a deep voice, You can check where Yi Xian is. He still believed that it was possible that Yi Xian had taken it away. In the distance, the middle-aged man was about to speak when a voice sounded in his mind, This matter is indeed a little strange. Yi Xian isn't a simple person. Let's check where he is to prevent us from being used by others. The middle-aged man nodded slightly. He glanced around and spread out his divine sense like a fishing net. After a while, he found Yi Xian's location. At this moment, Yi Xian was in front of the dual realm sky and seemed to be trying to leave. In the next moment, the middle-aged man appeared in front of Yi Xian. The gray-robed elder wanted to move, but more than 10 divine senses were locked onto him. The gray-robed elder's expression was extremely gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. Yi Xian was astonished when he saw the middle-aged man suddenly appear. You are? The middle-aged man stared at Yi Xian. Do you have that treasure? Treasure? Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, "Didn't I already hand it over?" The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Someone took it?" The middle-aged man said, "It was a swordsman." Yi Xian asked, "Was it the sword sect?" The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "You suspect me?" The middle-aged man said, "The sword sect said it was you." Yi Xian smiled. "Do you think I have that ability?" The middle-aged man shook his head. "I don't think you have that ability. However, I still want to confirm it." Yi Xian's expression sank. "How do you confirm it?" The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. "Let me scan you with my divine sense." Yi Xian's eyes narrowed. "Do you think I'm easy to bully?" The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian grinned. He opened his palm, and a strand of sword light suddenly flew out and shot into the sky, calling for help. The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed. He naturally knew that there was someone behind Yi Xian, and it wasn't an ordinary person. Even the people from the dual realm sky were extremely fearful of the legendary plain-dressed woman. It was precisely because of this that Yi Xian had been able to reach the dual world sky alive. The reason they hadn't attacked him was because they didn't want to become enemies with Yi Xian. To be more precise, they didn't want to become enemies with the people behind Yi Xian. Now, Yi Xian was calling for help. The middle-aged man fell silent for a moment before he said, "Yi Xian, we have no intention of becoming enemies with you. We just want to confirm if that treasure is in your hands. If it isn't, I'm willing to apologize." Yi Xian fell silent. The middle-aged man hurriedly said, "We just want to confirm if that treasure is in your hands. If it isn't, we're willing to open the dual world sky gate right away and let you leave." Yi Xian said, "Go ahead." The middle-aged man was slightly relieved. He didn't want to become enemies with the people behind Yi Xian either. No one wanted to make more enemies. The middle-aged man didn't think too much about it, and his divine sense swept towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't resist it. A short while later, the middle-aged man's face sank. Yi Xian spoke indifferently, "You seem to have forgotten something." The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. "What is it?" Yi Xian said, "I forgot about the sword sect." The sword sect. The middle-aged man frowned slightly, and it didn't take long for his expression to change. He's trying to buy time until the experts of the sword sect arrive. As soon as he finished speaking, he'd vanished on the spot. Yi Xian shrugged, "Remember what you said." As soon as he finished speaking, he swiftly vanished into the distance. The middle-aged man returned to the gray-robed old man. The gray-robed old man was about to speak when the middle-aged man suddenly said, "He's buying time. Kill him." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. Meanwhile, over a dozen figures suddenly appeared from the shadows. Over a dozen extraordinary experts had attacked in unison. The gray-robed old man's expression instantly became unsightly when he witnessed this scene. He didn't have the time to think, and he immediately slapped his right hand forward. Countless rays of light surged out from within him, and it only took an instant for the sky to be covered in rays of light. Around 15 minutes later, the surroundings suddenly returned to calm. At this moment, only the gray-robed old man's soul remained. Moreover, his soul was extremely illusory. The middle-aged man walked over to the gray-robed old man, and he glanced at the gray-robed old man's spatial ring. Soon, his expression sank. "Where is that thing?" The gray-robed old man stared at the middle-aged man with a ferocious smile on his face. "Idiots. You're all a bunch of idiots. That thing isn't in my hands at all." Just at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the side. "It might be in the hands of the sword sect." The middle-aged man turned around, and the one who spoke was a woman. It was Yuan Xiaodao. Yuan Shaodao smiled lightly. Besides the sword sect, I can't think of a second swordsman who can take away that treasure silently in front of us. Even the sword venerable can't do it. The middle-aged man spoke solemnly. You mean that the members of the sword sect have taken that treasure back to the sword sect? Yuan Shaodao replied, not necessarily. The dual world sky is closed now, so it won't be easy for the members of the sword sect to leave silently. So, if I'm not wrong, that treasure is still in the dual world sky, and it should be in the hands of the sword sect. When she spoke up to this point, she gazed at the gray-robed old man. Why don't you tell me the truth? The gray-robed old man gazed at Yuan Shaodao. Who are you? Yuan Shaodao smiled, and then she gazed at the middle-aged man. Why don't you use some secret techniques to interrogate me? The middle-aged man fell silent for a moment, and then he gazed at the gray-robed old man. Where exactly is that divine treasure? Huh. The gray-robed old man suddenly roared with laughter. Good. Very good. Very good. Ha ha ha. Just you wait. Just you wait. Ha ha ha. The gray-robed old man vanished amidst his laughter. The middle-aged man's face was quite gloomy. He hadn't expected that he wouldn't be able to obtain the world prison pagoda in the end. Meanwhile, Yuan Shaodao suddenly said, Everyone, the sword sect probably won't let the matter rest. The middle-aged man laughed coldly. Do we need to fear the sword sect? He wasn't being conceited, but the people who had come here weren't ordinary. Even though the sword sect was very strong, they weren't weak either. Yuan Shaodao nodded slightly, and then she left silently. The middle-aged man fell silent for a moment before he said, Everyone, are all of you afraid of the sword sect? A voice resounded from the shadows. Haha. What's there to be afraid of? Don't worry, Li He, we all played a part in killing that old man from the sword sect. So, we'll advance and retreat with you. The middle-aged man called Li He nodded. Everyone, look around. There are definitely other members of the sword sect in the dual world sky. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had snuck out of the dual world sky. He hadn't chosen to stay in the dual world sky because it wasn't necessary. He wanted to develop in a wretched manner. Yi Xian had just left the dual world sky when numerous rays of light suddenly slashed towards him from afar. Their target wasn't him but the dual world sky. Chapter 8:10. The Dual Realm Sky. On this day, several rays of sword light slashed down. Boom! The gate of the dual realm sky suddenly trembled violently, and then exploded. This was the first time in countless years that the dual realm sky had been attacked. As the gate of the dual realm sky shattered, 3 sword cultivators appeared in the dual realm sky. The leader was a white-robed old man with 2 swords on his back. His gaze was sharp as a sword, and he emanated monstrous killing intent. Behind the white-robed old man stood a middle-aged man and a woman in green. Both of them carried 2 swords on their backs. At this moment, their eyes were filled with ghastly killing intent. The Sword Sect. Although the Sword Sect rarely appeared in the 4th dimension and rarely interfered in worldly affairs, it didn't mean that the Sword Sect didn't have the ability. On the contrary, they looked down on the 4th dimension, so they didn't want to interfere in the 4th dimension's affairs. But now, a member of the Sword Sect had been killed. To the Sword Sect, this was an extraordinary humiliation. Someone dared to kill a member of the Sword Sect. The white-robed old man in the lead glanced coldly at the surroundings. He was about to speak when a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of him. This middle-aged man was Li He. Li He looked at the white-robed old man and didn't speak. The white-robed old man stared fixedly at Li He. How dare you kill a member of my sword sect? Li He smiled. What? Can't I kill a member of your sword sect? The white-robed old man narrowed his eyes. In the next moment, he suddenly shouted angrily, "Slash!" Buzz! A sword slashed out from behind the white-robed old man. Li He's eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned forward and punched. Boom! A powerful force swept out from his fist. However, the force was shattered before it could even approach the sword. The sword instantly arrived in front of Li He. Li He suddenly roared furiously and punched with both fists. Rumble! An explosion resounded, and in an instant, Li He retreated explosively by almost 3 kilometers. As soon as he stopped, his body began to crack. It was torn apart by countless rays of sword energy. The white-robed old man was just about to attack when more than a dozen afterimages suddenly appeared in the surroundings. The white-robed elder's eyes flashed viciously when he saw this. Slaughter the dual realm sky. As soon as he finished speaking, the other sword on his back also flew out. The 2 people behind him also suddenly made their moves. 3 against 13. Moreover, he was not at a disadvantage at all. On the other side, Yuan Xiaodao and Zhu Xier watched quietly. A moment later, Yuan Xiaodao whispered, "This sword sect is incredible." Zhu Xier nodded slightly. The 3 of them from the sword sect were fighting against 13 people, but not only were they not at a disadvantage, they were even suppressing them. Swordsmen. These 3 swordsmen and the other 13 swordsmen were basically at the same realm, but the sword sect's 3 swordsmen were too powerful. Zhu Xier suddenly asked, "Can the dual realm sky go against the sword sect?" Yuan Xiaodao said with a smile, "Don't underestimate the 2-realm sky. The people here are not simple at all." Zhu Xier was just about to speak when a powerful pressure swept down from the sky not far away. Then, a black hand suddenly slammed down from the sky. Rumble! Not far away, the 3 swordsmen from the sword sect retreated several thousand zhang. Li He and the rest also retreated several thousand zhang. The white-robed elder leading the sword sect looked up into the sky. From the depths of the sky, a voice sounded, "Can't the sword sect's people be killed?" The white-robed elder narrowed his eyes, "What a big tone you have." The voice laughed, "The sword sect has already obtained that supreme treasure. What else do you want?" The white-robed elder frowned, "When did my sword sect obtain that supreme treasure?" The voice laughed lightly, "What? Don't tell me that the supreme treasure isn't with your sword sect." The white-robed elder spoke solemnly, "The old man has never seen such a supreme treasure." The voice fell silent for a short moment before it said, "Besides your sword sect, I can't think of any other swordsman who can seize that treasure from right under our noses." The white-robed elder's face was quite gloomy. "What? Do you think the old man is lying to you?" The voice said, "Li He, have you investigated Yi Xian?" Li He nodded, "I have. He doesn't possess that treasure at all. Moreover, even though he isn't simple, he doesn't have the ability to seize that treasure from right under our noses." When he spoke up to this point, he gazed at the white-robed elder. "It's definitely the sword sect. I presume that treasure is in his possession." The voice fell silent for a short moment before it said, "There's something fishy about this. However, the sword sect is the biggest suspect for now." As he spoke, a powerful pressure enveloped the white-robed elder and the others. "Allow my divine sense to search all of you." Search. The white-robed elder's expression instantly became ferocious. "It seems to me that all of you really want to die." As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm and a ray of light flashed. Call for help. He was very clear that it was absolutely impossible for the 3 of them to defeat everyone here. He could only call for the experts of the sword sect. Moreover, he couldn't just call for 1 or 2. The white-robed elder had just started to call for help when the voice suddenly resounded from the sky. "Kill!" As soon as the voice resounded, over 10 people suddenly charged towards the white-robed elder and the others. The white-robed elder laughed savagely, hold on until our reinforcements arrive." As soon as he finished speaking, the two swords on his back suddenly flew out and tore through the sky. The battle had begun once more. In the distance, Zhu Xie, who stood by Yuan Xiaodao's side, suddenly asked, "Where's Yi Xian?" Yuan Xiaodao laughed, "Him? I wonder where he is right now." Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground within a boundless mountain range. At this moment, he was madly absorbing the ancient books he'd obtained from the temple. These books didn't just contain the fist Dao, there were also the spear Dao, sword Dao, saber Dao. In any case, there were a lot of them. He didn't want to learn all of them. Instead, he wanted to absorb their essence to strengthen his sword Dao, or to make up for the shortcomings of his sword Dao. Sword Dao. He was currently at the light state sword Dao. It was very, very difficult for him to improve it further. And these ancient books were his hope. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. During this period of time, no one came to disturb him. This was the most comfortable period for him. While he was cultivating, something big happened in the dual realm sky. In the dual realm sky. After the white-robed elder called for help, the experts of the dual realm sky began to frantically surround the three sword sect experts. Although the three swordsmen were powerful, they were ultimately defeated. In less than an hour, only the white-robed elder was left. At this moment, the experts of the dual realm sky had already surrounded the white-robed swordsman. The white-robed swordsman coldly swept his gaze around. His expression was incomparably ferocious, the sword in his right hand trembling madly. At this moment, Li He suddenly said, "Where is that supreme treasure?" The white-robed swordsman looked at Li He and smiled sinisterly. "My sword sect will make you pay a painful price." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly roared angrily, "Sword burial." As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in his hand suddenly trembled violently. Then, it turned into a sword light and sank into the space between his eyebrows. Boom! In the blink of an eye, countless sword lights erupted from his body. The leading Sky of Two Realms expert was caught off guard, and the sword light sliced through his body. The other Sky of Two Realms experts frantically retreated. With this retreat, everyone retreated tens of thousands of feet away. In the area where the white-robed elder was, the space had already been torn into a pitch-black black hole. After a while, that space returned to normal. Now, the white-robed elder was no longer there. That attack just now was the white-robed elder's final attack. In the distance, Yuan Xiaodao said softly, "He self-destructed just like that. This sword sect swordsman is not simple." After saying that, she looked at Zhu Xie. Quote, "Lead the people of the temple and immediately leave the dual realm sky." Quote, Zhu Xie asked, "Why?" Yuan Xiaodao said softly, "Because the sword sect might make a big move soon. The temple should not participate in this mess." Zhu Xie nodded. She also did not want to participate. In fact, she did not want to participate in the first place because the temple would not take the prison pagoda no matter what. The temple did not have the ability to possess such a treasure. As if thinking of something, Zhu Xie suddenly asked, "Where is the pagoda now? Where was the prison pagoda?" The corners of Yuan Xiaodao's mouth curled up slightly. "What do you think?" In a mountain range, Yi Xian sat quietly on the ground. Around him, two sword intents were constantly twisting. Break. All this time, he had been thinking about a question. What was breaking? From the name, it was breaking. From the perspective of the sword Dao, what was breaking? How could he break it? He did not understand. At this moment, he really wanted someone to remind him, but there was no one. Lian Qian and Yan Jia were not good at the sword Dao, and the eighth floor completely ignored him. As for the sword venerable, he did not say anything and let him comprehend it himself. This gave Yi Xian a headache. Perhaps he would comprehend it if he gave some pointers. However, he also understood later on. There were many things that would only be useful if he understood it himself. No matter how reasonable the words of others were, if he did not experience it himself, he would not be able to understand it. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. In the mountain range, Yi Xian just sat there cross-legged. Many times, the sword Dao relied on enlightenment. Not only the sword Dao, but in fact, many times in life relied on enlightenment. However, some people might not be enlightened their entire lives, just like him. If the opportunity did not come, he might be stuck in the bright realm for the rest of his life. Swordsman. The further one went, the fewer powerful swordsmen there were. Yi Xian just sat there. In the end, he looked like a statue. In the dual realm sky. After the 3 swordsmen from the sword sect were killed, the entire dual realm sky was on high alert. This was because all the experts knew that this matter was not over yet. Apart from that, all the experts in the dual realm sky were looking for the world prison pagoda. This was because they were not sure whether the 5th-dimensional treasure was in the hands of the sword sect. In the beginning, some people suspected Yi Xian. However, every time someone suspected Yi Xian, he would come out and defend Yi Xian. Because he was the one who had investigated Yi Xian, and Yi Xian really did not have the treasure on him. Moreover, Yi Xian did not have the strength to do so. Therefore, the experts in the dual realm sky ruled out Yi Xian as a suspect. P.S. Some people say that I am becoming more and more shameless. Do you have some misunderstanding about me? Chapter 8:11. No one doubted Yi Xian anymore. Because no one believed that Yi Xian had the ability to steal the pagoda in front of them. With Yi Xian eliminated as a suspect, there was only one target left. The sword sect. Because the one who stole the world prison pagoda was a swordsman. This matter was definitely related to the sword sect. On this day, a swordsman arrived at the dual realm sky. From his appearance, the swordsman looked to be in his 30s. He wore an ink-white robe and held an ancient sword in his left hand. The swordsman's long hair draped over his shoulders. He exuded a scholarly aura as he slowly walked toward the dual realm sky. At this time, he suddenly appeared in front of the swordsman. He looked at the swordsman without saying a word. The swordsman looked up. Above the clouds stood a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man wore a gray robe with his hands behind his back and a faint smile on his face. The swordsman said softly, "Chen Shi." The most monstrous and powerful person in the myriad star universe back then. The middle-aged man above the clouds was Chen Shi. A legend from a certain universe. Chen Shi smiled. "Looks like your sword sect investigated me." The swordsman nodded. "4 swordsmen from my sword sect died in the dual realm sky. It's all related to you." Chen Shi nodded. "It's related to me." Saying so, he looked at the swordsman. "And then?" The swordsman looked at Chen Shi. "You're very confident." Chen Shi shook his head and smiled. "Are you threatening me?" The sword in the swordsman's left hand suddenly flew out and pierced the sky. Above the clouds, Chen Shi opened his palm and pressed down lightly. Boom! The sword ray was forcibly suppressed in the air. At this time, the swordsman suddenly disappeared. Rumble! In the air, Chen Shi retreated nearly 100 zhang while the swordsman also returned to his original position. The two of them separated upon contact. Chen Shi looked at swordsman and smiled. "If you're alone, I'm afraid you won't be able to sweep through the dual realm sky." Swordsman nodded. "We underestimated the dual realm sky." At that moment, swordsmen realized that they had greatly underestimated the strength of the dual realm sky. Although swordsman was transcendent, the dual realm sky was not weak either. This place was the gathering place of the super powerhouses of countless cosmoses. Since these people dared to rush into the fifth dimension, how could they be ordinary people? The sword sect couldn't crush the two worlds realm. Of course, the sword sect wasn't afraid of the dual realm sky. Swordsman suddenly said, "Do you think that the fifth-dimensional treasure is in the hands of my sword sect?" Chen Shi shook his head. "At first, I did think it was in the hands of your sword sect, but now," at this point, he glanced at the surroundings and said softly, "Looks like things aren't that simple." The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. It was as if someone was deliberately framing the sword sect. But if someone was framing the sword sect, who was it? Yi Xian. The first person he thought of was Yi Xian. Because if the dual realm sky and the sword sect fought, it would be most beneficial to Yi Xian. However, there was a problem. That was, how could Yi Xian take away that treasure under everyone's noses without anyone noticing? Moreover, Li He had personally inspected Yi Xian and confirmed that the treasure was indeed not on Yi Xian. Of course, he had no time to care about Yi Xian now. After killing a member of the sword sect definitely wouldn't let it go. What he had to face now was the sword sect. Below, the swordsman suddenly said, "Where is Yi Xian?" Chen Shi was about to speak when a voice suddenly came from the side. A voice suddenly came from the side. "Yi Xian? Is the sword sect trying to say that the treasure has returned to Yi Xian's hands?" Chen Shi turned his head and saw a woman slowly walking over. It was Yuan Xiaodao. The swordsman looked at Yuan Xiaodao. "Who are you?" Yuan Xiaodao smiled. "The Temple of Light." "The Temple of Light." The swordsman frowned. "What does this have to do with the Temple of Light?" Yuan Xiaodao smiled. "Since you pointed at Yi Xian, you must mean that the treasure is still in Yi Xian's hands, right?" The swordsman retorted, "Isn't it possible? But I feel that the treasure should be in the sword sect's hands. After all, compared to Yi Xian, your sword sect has the ability to take it away from us without a trace. What do you think?" The swordsman shook her head. "According to what my sword sect knows, the treasure seems to have recognized Yi Xian as its master. It is a fifth-dimensional object and has a special ability. If it cooperates with Yi Xian, it wouldn't be difficult for Yi Xian to take it away without a trace and frame my sword sect, right?" Yuan Xiaodao nodded. "What you said isn't impossible." As she spoke, she looked at Li He. "Li He, you personally investigated that Yi Xian. Tell us." Li He said in a deep voice, "I scanned his body with my divine sense, but I didn't find the treasure." The swordsman asked, "So you think the treasure isn't on him?" Li He frowned. Just as he was about to speak, Yuan Xiaodao suddenly said, "How about this? Why don't we go to your sword sect and search it?" The swordsman looked at Yuan Xiaodao. "You represent the sky of two realms?" Yuan Xiaodao smiled. "I'm just saying. Don't take it seriously." She retreated to the side and didn't say anything else. In the sky, Chen Shi was expressionless. As Yuan Xiaodao said, the most suspicious party was the sword sect. Of course, Yi Xian was also a suspect. However, he was less suspicious because he was very weak. Yi Xian might not have thought that the reason he was less suspicious and no longer targeted was because he was weak. It was because he was weak that others thought it was impossible for him to take away the pagoda silently. At this moment, the swordsman suddenly turned around and left. Amongst the people present here, only he was clearly aware that the precious treasure wasn't in the sword sect's possession. Since it wasn't in the sword sect's possession, then who possessed it? The one who took away the treasure was a swordsman. It was very likely that someone was framing the sword sect. Yi Xian. The swordsman decided to find Yi Xian first. He wanted to see Yi Xian in person. As for the death of the sword sect's powerhouse, he could only put it aside for now. Seeing the swordsman leave, Chen Shi and the others didn't stop him because they couldn't. If this kind of powerhouse wanted to leave, it would be very difficult to make him stay. Yuan Xiaodao glanced at the swordsman in the distance and didn't say anything. At this moment, Chen Shi suddenly said, "Pass down my order. Investigate all the suspects." After saying that, he turned around and left. In the mountain range, Yi Xian was still sitting cross-legged on the ground. He had been sitting here for 7 or 8 days. During this time, he was like a statue, not moving at all. Enlightenment. If he wanted to break through to the next realm, he could only rely on enlightenment. What was breaking through? He had been thinking about it for a long time. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes and looked to his right. There was an insect egg on a branch there. Yi Xian stared at the insect egg. About half an hour later, the insect egg suddenly trembled and cracked open. Then, a small butterfly crawled out. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned. Soon, Yi Xian was ecstatic. He understood now. Boom! Boom! 2 sword intents suddenly swept out from Yi Xian's body. After these 2 sword intents came out, they directly exploded. Break? In fact, it was breaking out of a cocoon and being reborn. Without breaking, there can be no construction. With this thought in mind, the 2 sword intents around Yi Xian's body began to surge crazily like a volcano eruption, extremely terrifying. His sword intents also spread wildly in all directions. Wherever they passed, there was an endless sword chime. Just like that, after about 2 hours, Yi Xian suddenly stood up. He opened his palm, and in an instant, the surrounding sword intents retreated into his palm like a tide. In the end, it turned into a black and white sword condensed from sword intents. Sword of sword intents. Yi Xian suddenly clenched his right hand. Boom! The black and white sword suddenly exploded. In an instant, the surrounding tens of thousands of li was directly covered by his sword intents. Break! This was rebirth. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. His surroundings were covered by sword intents. Under the cover of these sword intents, he could clearly feel everything around him. This feeling was very, very mysterious. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Withdraw." With that, the sword intents instantly disappeared, and in his palm, there was a black and white sword. Breakthrough. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. Currently, he was fully capable of fighting against strong people in the life realm. Of course, there was still a gap between him and strong people in the life-breaking realm. After all, he was only in the unknown realm. His realm was still too low. Realm. Right now, his top priority was to improve his realm and his physical body's realm. Yi Xian waved his right hand lightly, and the black and white sword in his hand instantly vanished. After that, he was about to leave. However, right at this moment, a ray of sword light suddenly tore through the sky and descended directly in front of him in the blink of an eye. The sword ray dissipated, revealing a middle-aged man. The man was the swordsman from the sword sect. Yi Xian looked at the swordsman in front of him without saying a word. The swordsman also looked at Yi Xian. As he watched, his pupils suddenly shrank. Breakthrough. How is this possible? Yi Xian looked at the swordsman. What's the matter? The swordsman stared at Yi Xian. When did you achieve breakthrough? Yi Xian asked in return. You are? The swordsman said, Sword Sect, Jiangqi. Sword Sect. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, what kind of grudge do I have with your sword sect? Your sword sect just won't let me go. Jiangqi looked at Yi Xian. Is that fifth-dimensional treasure still in your hands? Yi Xian frowned. Isn't it in your sword sect's hands? Jiang Qi looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Isn't it in your sword sect's hands?" Jiang Qi still said nothing. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Why do you think it's in my hands?" Jiang Qi said, "Intuition." Yi Xian said indifferently, "That treasure is indeed not in my hands." Saying this, he paused and said, "That day, after I left it there, I was preparing to leave the Dual Realm Sky. Later, the Dual Realm Sky powerhouse Li He suddenly came to me and told me that the treasure was no longer there. I don't know if what he said was true or false." Hearing this, Jiang Qi frowned. "Is it possible that they have already obtained that treasure, but in order to protect it, they deliberately framed my sword sect?" Yi Xian. Chapter 8:12. Yi Xian didn't say anything. Jiang Qi fell silent as well. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. A short while later, Jiang Qi looked at Yi Xian. "Of course, there's another possibility. That treasure is in your hands, Yi Xian, and you've purposely given it up to shift the blame to my sword sect and reap the benefits." Yi Xian smiled, "You think too highly of me. If I had that ability, why would I hand it over?" Jiang Qi looked at Yi Xian in silence. Yi Xian smiled, "It looks like you don't believe me." Jiang Qi said, "I really don't believe you." Yi Xian smiled, "Then I have no other choice. However, I still want to ask you something. Do you really think I have the ability to take away that treasure?" Jiang Qi fell silent. Yi Xian walked to Jiang Qi. "There are two possibilities now. First, the treasure is in my hands, and I shift the blame to your sword sect, causing your sword sect and the Dual World Sky's experts to suffer heavy losses while I reap the benefits. Second, the treasure has already been obtained by the Dual World Sky's experts, and they've chosen to shift the blame to your sword sect and make your sword sect take the blame. Now, which possibility do you think is more likely?" Jiang Qi looked at Yi Xian, and his left thumb suddenly pressed against the hilt of his sword, ready to strike. Yi Xian smiled, "If you really make a move, then you'll really be playing into someone's hands. Because they'll definitely hope that the person behind me will fight your sword sect to the death." "The person behind him?" Jiang Qi narrowed his eyes. At this moment, he suddenly remembered that Yi Xian was not a loner. This fellow had someone behind him as well. Moreover, they weren't weak. If the sword sect and the person behind Yi Xian fought to the death, who would benefit the most? Naturally, it would be the Dual World Sky's experts. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, "The sword sect's people have been killed. Yet, all of you are still entangled with that fifth-dimensional treasure. If I may be so bold as to ask, have you ever thought about those dead swordsmen? Did they die unjustly?" With that, Yi Xian glanced at Jiang Qi contemptuously, then turned around and left. Behind Yi Xian, Jiang Qi remained silent. His left thumb stared at the hilt of his sword, but in the end, he chose not to attack. Just as Yi Xian had said, the people of the sword sect were dead. Now, it was no longer just a matter of the fifth-dimensional treasure. If the sword sect attacked Yi Xian would most likely join hands with the Dual World Sky. Yi Xian alone wasn't scary, but the people behind him were. After a moment of silence, Jiang Qi turned and left. Yi Xian didn't hide or return to the black-yellow Great World. On the contrary, he returned to the Dual World Sky. The reason why he didn't hide was because the more he hid, the more dangerous it would be. On the contrary, the more high-profile he appeared, the safer he would be. This was because the more he did so, the less people would think that the fifth-dimensional treasure was on him. When Yi Xian returned to the Dual World Sky, Li He appeared in front of him once again. Yi Xian cupped his fists. "Senior Li He." Li He was slightly startled. He hadn't expected Yi Xian to be so courteous, so he wasn't used to it. However, he still returned the greeting politely. Yi Xian suddenly said, the sword sect's people came looking for me. Li He looked at Yi Xian. Why? Yi Xian said in a low voice, they think that the treasure is on me. Li He said with a smile, then is it on you or not? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Senior Li He, do you really think that the fifth-dimensional treasure will recognize me as its master? Li He was silent. Yi Xian said, if such a treasure really recognized me as its master, I would have brought it into the fifth dimension long ago. Why would I stay in the fourth dimension and be targeted by so many experts? Li He nodded. That's true, Yi Xian said again, however, the sword sect insists that the treasure is on me. I really don't know what their intentions are. Li He said in a low voice, I'm afraid they want to use you to attract our attention and then make us fight you until both sides suffer. Yi Xian frowned. That's not possible, Li He smiled coldly. Why not? Yi Xian said, they are all swordsmen. Why would they use such despicable methods? Li He shook his head. Little friend, you are still too young and naive. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Senior, what do you mean? Li He said in a low voice, this is not some despicable method. It's a scheme. Moreover, swordsmen are not all straightforward. There are many who use underhanded methods. Little friend, you are still too young. You don't know how complicated the human nature of this world is. Yi Xian sighed and did not say anything. Li He suddenly said, Little friend, I think that the sword sect will definitely not let you off. What are your plans from now on? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. The sword sect is powerful. What else can I do? I can only escape. Li He looked at Yi Xian. You can't escape. For you, there are only two safe places in the fourth dimension. One is the life-forbidden zone and the other is the dual-realm sky. As for the life-forbidden zone, you can't go to that place. They will not take you in either. Yi Xian looked at Li He. Senior, can I stay in the dual-realm sky? Li He smiled. Of course. You should know that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yi Xian hurriedly bowed. Many thanks. Li He said, Little friend, I will bring you to see someone. Yi Xian nodded. Okay. Li He left with Yi Xian. Soon, the two of them came to a river. There was a small wooden house by the river. In front of the wooden house was a courtyard. In the courtyard, a middle-aged man was lying on a chair, swaying gently. This middle-aged man was Chen Shi. After Li He brought Yi Xian to the courtyard, he bowed slightly and then quietly retreated. Yi Xian looked at Chen Shi. Senior? Chen Shi said softly, come here. Yi Xian walked to Chen Shi's side. Chen Shi looked at Yi Xian. His eyes seemed to be able to see through everything. However, Yi Xian's expression did not change. Chen Shi retracted his gaze. Sit. As his voice fell, a wooden chair appeared behind Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not stand on ceremony. He sat down. Senior, you were looking for me? Chen Shi said softly, you have the most contact with that fifth-dimensional treasure. Can you tell me about it? Yi Xian was silent. Chen Shi smiled. What is it? Yi Xian smiled. Senior, do you want to hear the truth or a lie? Chen Shi looked at Yi Xian. What do you think? Yi Xian said softly, Senior, let me tell you something from the bottom of my heart. Whoever obtains that fifth-dimensional treasure will be unlucky. Chen Shi said, Karma? Yi Xian was a little surprised. He did not expect that Chen Shi would know that there was karma with the fifth-dimensional treasure. Chen Shi smiled. Such a divine object must carry a powerful karma. The reason why the temple master did not take it is also because of this, right? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Chen Shi suddenly said, "Do you know why you are still alive?" Yi Xian hesitated, then said, "Maybe I am lucky." Chen Shi laughed. "You are really funny. Let me tell you, the reason why you're still alive is because you've been holding on to this treasure of the fifth dimension until now. Simply put, there's definitely someone who's shouldering the karma of this object for you. I'm afraid the person behind you is much, much more frightening than we can imagine." Yi Xian smiled, but did not say anything. Chen Shi suddenly said, "Can that fifth-dimensional treasure really lead to the fifth dimension?" Yi Xian nodded. "It can." Chen Shi smiled. "Then why don't you use it to lead to the fifth dimension?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "Senior, if I go to the fifth dimension when I haven't even settled down in the fourth dimension, wouldn't that be courting death?" Chen Shi laughed. "Indeed." Saying this, his expression suddenly became complicated. "If we go to the fifth dimension, won't we also be courting death?" Yi Xian was puzzled. "Then why do you and the others?" Chen Shi looked at Yi Xian. "Our road in the fourth dimension has come to an end." Hearing this, Yi Xian understood. Chen Shi and the others had reached their limits. If they wanted to go further, they could only go to the fifth dimension. Thinking of this, Yi Xian asked again, "Senior, is there no way to go further in the fourth dimension?" Chen Shi said softly, "Do you know what is the highest realm in the fourth dimension?" Yi Xian shook his head. Chen Shi said, "Above the life realm is life-breaking realm, and there are 3 known realms above life-breaking realm: seeking Tao, entering Tao, and breaking Tao. In the history of the 2 realms, there has only been one person who has reached the Tao-breaking realm." Saying this, he paused, then said, "Actually, it is said that there is another realm above the Tao-breaking realm." Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "What realm?" Chen Shi's expression became a bit complicated. "Destroying Tao." Saying this, he looked up at the vast sky and said softly, "Seeking Tao, entering Tao, and breaking Tao, I know all of them, but what does destroying Tao mean? How do I destroy this Tao? Are you kidding me?" Yi Xian hesitated, then said, "Senior, what realm are you in?" Chen Shi said with a smile, "The peak of the life-breaking realm." Yi Xian nodded slightly. Just as he was about to speak, Chen Shi suddenly said, "The woman in the plain dress behind you should be at least at the peak of the life-breaking realm, right?" "The woman in the plain dress?" Yi Xian was silent. He really did not know the realm of the woman in the plain dress. How strong was she? However, if he guessed wrong, the woman in the plain dress must be more than the peak of the life-breaking realm. It was just a kind of intuition. Just how strong was she? It was always a mystery. At this moment, Chen Shi suddenly said, "In the legendary fifth dimension, there must be experts at the destroying Tao realm." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, to be honest, we are going to the fifth dimension to be beaten up. Moreover, once the passage between the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension is opened, our fourth dimension will be in danger, right?" Chen Shi shook his head. "Tao is big, and living beings are small." Hearing this, Yi Xian was silent. He also wanted to become stronger, but if he had to sacrifice others to become stronger, he would not do it. As a person, you can be shameless, but you must have a bottom line and principles. His principle was that if people did not offend him, he would not offend them. Chen Shi suddenly asked, "Is that fifth dimension treasure still in your hands?" Yi Xian shook his head decisively. "No." Chen Shi was silent. Somewhere in the vast starry sky, a woman in a plain dress slowly walked in the starry sky. She just walked like that, dressed in plain clothes, like a goddess from the 9 heavens. After an unknown amount of time, she suddenly stopped. Not far in front of her, the space suddenly split open. Soon, a middle-aged man walked out. The middle-aged man looked around and said softly, "Is this the fourth dimension?" So weak. As he said this, his gaze fell on the woman in the plain dress. We have tolerated you for a long time. P.S. Update late. I will punish myself by not going to the great treasure sword today. Chapter 8:13. Endure. In reality, the fifth dimension was enduring the plain-dressed woman. If not for the plain-dressed woman, the experts of the fifth dimension would have already obtained the world prison pagoda. Although they could not come to the fourth dimension, they could still use some special methods to do so. Of course, their strength would be greatly reduced. Moreover, it would be extremely dangerous because they would have to face all kinds of restrictions. However, for the world prison pagoda, all the risks were worth it. However, what they did not expect was that they would encounter a huge problem. The plain-dressed woman. This woman had forcibly suppressed them. Being suppressed by someone from the fourth dimension was undoubtedly a great humiliation to the experts of the fifth dimension. Of course, they did not dare to look down on this plain-dressed woman. This was because she was truly powerful. In the battlefield, the plain-dressed woman looked at the middle-aged man without saying anything. The middle-aged man's body was somewhat illusory. It did not seem like a corpse, but it was not completely illusory either. It gave off a feeling of being both real and illusory. The middle-aged man stared at the plain-dressed woman. I have to say, although the fourth dimension is weak, you are very powerful. Powerful to the point of surpassing our expectations. The plain-dressed woman suddenly said, "Do you know why you are not dead yet?" The middle-aged man smiled. Why? The plain-dressed woman looked at the middle-aged man. Because you do not know that you are already dead. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes. Just as he was about to speak, his expression suddenly changed. This was because a sword mark had appeared on his throat. In an instant, the middle-aged man's body became illusory. However, he did not disappear. Within his body, countless red threads tightly wrapped around him. It was these threads that protected his life. The middle-aged man looked at the plain-dressed woman. My body is in the fifth dimension. How can you kill me? Unless your sword can surpass time and space. After saying this, the red threads on his body suddenly exploded. Bang! The middle-aged man rapidly retreated. As he retreated, he looked at the plain-dressed woman in shock. You! Impossible, impossible. Gradually, the middle-aged man completely disappeared. The plain-dressed woman raised her head and looked at the spatial passage behind the middle-aged man. Spending so much money to send such a weakling over. Who are you looking down on? After saying this, she suddenly slashed out with her sword. Chi! A wisp of sword light directly entered the spatial tunnel. This wisp of sword light directly passed through layers of space. It shuttled through, and everywhere it passed, it tore inch by inch, straight towards the fifth dimension. When the sword light reached a certain place, a pitch-black hand suddenly blocked the sword light. Boom! The pitch-black hand trembled violently and retreated explosively while the strand of sword light was nailed firmly to the center of its palm. Just like that, after retreating for over 100 kilometers, the black hand rumbled and exploded into pieces while the strand of sword light remained completely unharmed. The sword light kept moving forward. Soon, a spear suddenly tore through the air and slashed at the sword light. The spear exuded an extremely ancient aura. The tip of the spear flickered with a hint of scarlet light. The powerful energy contained within the spear seemed to be able to destroy the entire universe. It was extremely terrifying. Boom! Following the sound of an explosion, the powerful spear directly exploded and turned into ashes. As for the sword light, it shuttled back and forth. At this moment, it had already entered a strange space. Along the way, it cut through everything like a hot knife through butter. There was no power that could stop it. And when the sword light arrived in front of a rune barrier, the spatial barrier between the fourth and fifth dimensions. It was precisely this barrier that prevented fourth dimension experts from entering the fifth dimension, and it also prevented fifth dimension experts from entering the fourth dimension. When the sword light arrived, the rune barrier suddenly trembled slightly. Then, a white, stop, character suddenly flew out and imprinted itself on the sword light. Boom! The sword light stopped. After a moment of silence, the sword light suddenly trembled violently. Boom! The sword light and the stop character exploded together. In the starry sky, the plain-dressed woman was expressionless. In fact, the barrier could not stop her, but it could restrain her. Once she was restrained, Yi Xian would be in danger. The current Yi Xian was not strong enough to protect himself. After a moment, the plain-dressed woman retracted her gaze and looked into the depths of the starry sky. Her gaze passed through countless star fields. A bunch of useless people. After saying that, she directly turned around and left. Not long after, she completely disappeared into the end of the starry sky. After the plain-dressed woman disappeared, a sigh suddenly rang out. There was a strong sense of helplessness in the voice. This time, the fifth dimension did not hesitate to let someone use this special method to come to the fourth dimension. They wanted to see if they could deal with the plain-dressed woman. Unfortunately, they had seriously underestimated the strength of the plain-dressed woman. In the beginning, they had simply believed that the woman in the plain dress was the strongest expert in the fourth dimension. However, at this moment, they suddenly realized that the strength of the woman in the plain dress was at the peak of the fifth dimension, let alone the fourth dimension. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. You can only restrain her, you can't face her head on. The voice seemed to be right in front of them, but it also seemed to be very far away. After a moment, the scene returned to normal. At this moment, the plain-dressed woman had already arrived in another part of the starry sky. In the boundless starry sky, the plain-dressed woman slowly walked. Her left hand was holding a strand of her beautiful hair. Her beautiful hair was gently twirling around her fingertips. She seemed to be thinking of something, and the corners of her mouth would curl up from time to time. At this moment, she was a little happy. When people lived, they needed to be tied down and worried about something. Only then would there be meaning in living. There was not only the way of the sword, not only longevity, but also him. After an unknown amount of time, the plain-dressed woman arrived in front of a spatial black hole. Within the spatial black hole, there was a powerful force that was constantly devouring her. The plain-dressed woman glanced at the black hole and was about to leave. But at this moment, a voice suddenly rang out from the pitch-black hole. You're so strong. The plain-dressed woman stopped and raised her eyebrows. How strong? The voice asked in reply, how strong? The corners of the plain-dressed woman's mouth curled up slightly. I don't know. The voice fell silent. The plain-dressed woman turned to leave. At this moment, the voice spoke again. You should go to the legendary fifth dimension, the plain-dressed woman said. Without him in the fifth dimension, what's the point of going there? The place where he is my heaven. As soon as she finished speaking, she had already disappeared at the end of the galaxy. In the field, a sigh rang out. Those who can go don't go, and those who want to go can't go. What a sin. In the dual realm sky. At this moment, the dual realm sky was abnormally quiet. After Jiang Qi from the sword sect left, no swordsman came to the dual realm sky again. Therefore, the dual realm sky was very peaceful. However, the experts in the dual realm sky knew that this was the calm before the storm. Would the sword sect let this matter rest? No. In front of the bamboo house, Yi Xian did not leave during this period of time. He had been following Chen Shi. In the courtyard, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. He was madly devouring swords. Rushing to the peak. Above the unknown realm was the creation realm, and above the creation realm was Earth Immortal. Above the Earth Immortal was the Fate realm. After the Fate realm was Fate Breaking, Seeking Tao, Entering Tao, Breaking Tao, and the legendary Tao Destruction. At present, the Tao Destruction realm might be the highest realm in the fourth dimension. As for the Tao Destruction realm, maybe it existed, maybe it didn't. In any case, regardless of whether it existed or not, what he needed to do now was to reach the Fate-Breaking realm. No, it would be best if he reached the Seeking Tao or Entering Tao. Chen Shi was not far away from Yi Xian. He was also a little surprised that Yi Xian did not leave. Yi Xian completely treated this place as his own home. During this period of time, he had been observing Yi Xian. He also wanted to know whether the treasure was in Yi Xian's hands. If it was really in Yi Xian's hands, it would mean that Yi Xian was sowing discord between the dual realm sky and the sword sect. When that happened, Yi Xian would definitely die. However, after interacting with him for a few days, he felt that the treasure might really not be in Yi Xian's hands. If it was really in Yi Xian's hands, Yi Xian would definitely not dare to stay in front of him. After a while, Chen Shi withdrew his gaze. At this moment, Li He suddenly appeared in front of him. Li He said solemnly, "The sword sect might be making a big move." Chen Shi nodded slightly. "How many people are coming?" Li He shook his head. "I don't know for now." Li He looked at Chen Shi, who said solemnly, "I can't find anything. I only know that the swordsman is rushing towards our dual realm sky." After a moment of silence, Chen Shi said, "Let our people prepare." Li He said, "Are we really going to fight to the death with the sword sect?" Chen Shi said softly, "This matter will not end after we kill the sword sect's people." Li He said, "Is the fifth dimensional treasure in the hands of the sword sect?" Now, the experts of the dual realm sky were not most concerned about the sword sect, but the fifth dimensional treasure. Was the fifth dimensional treasure in the sword sect? No one could be sure. Meanwhile, the sword sect was also wondering whether the fifth dimensional treasure was in the hands of the experts of the dual realm sky. Of course, this was not important now. The main problem now was that several swordsman experts of the sword sect had fallen in the dual realm sky. If the sword sect did not act, the prestige the sword sect had built up over countless years would be gone. Chen Shi suddenly looked at Yi Xian, who was still cultivating not far away. "Little friend Yi, the people of the sword sect are about to arrive. What do you think?" Yi Xian opened his eyes and looked at Chen Shi. After a moment of silence, he said, "Then I'll run." Li He's mouth twitched. "Little friend Yi, why are you afraid of them?" Yi Xian sighed softly. "I'm alone. How can I fight against the sword sect? In fact, I'm not afraid of death. What I'm afraid of is being made a scapegoat. The sword sect has always emphasized that the fifth dimensional treasure is still with me." "How vicious." Chen Shi nodded. "Indeed vicious. Little friend, it's more dangerous for you to go somewhere else. Why don't you join us to fight against the sword sect?" Yi Xian wanted to say something but hesitated. Chen Shi asked, "What?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "My strength is low. I'm afraid I won't be of much help. I'm not trying to decline. I'm just an unknown realm cultivator. Even if I have two external objects, my combat power is still limited." As he spoke up to hear, he looked at Chen Shi. "Seniors, Junior has a request." Chen Shi glanced at Yi Xian. "What is it?" Yi Xian said in a deep voice. "I'm currently in the unknown realm. I'm just a little bit away from the Great Perfection realm. However, I need two good swords. I wonder if the two seniors can help this junior. If I break through, I'll definitely live and die with you." Chapter 8:14. Chen Shi and Li He looked at each other in silence. A moment later, Li He sent a voice transmission to Chen Shi. This person has great potential and is extremely powerful. Why don't we help him and form a good relationship? Chen Shi nodded. As long as the prison pagoda was not in Yi Xian's hands, there was no conflict between Yi Xian and the dual realm sky. Since there was no irreconcilable conflict, they could make friends because Yi Xian was worthy of their friendship. Li He looked at Yi Xian and pointed with a finger. An ancient black sword landed in front of Yi Xian. I obtained this sword by chance years ago. However, I'm not a swordsman, so I've never used it. I'll give it to you now. Yi Xian took the ancient sword. Good sword. That was his first thought. He didn't know what rank this sword was, but it definitely wasn't low. Of course, it was definitely weaker than his soul-suppressing sword and executing heaven sword. However, if it was used for devouring, it would be the most suitable. Meanwhile, Chen Shi suddenly said, I'll give you something as well. As soon as he said that, a sword suddenly flew in front of Yi Xian. The sword was more than 4 feet long and was dark blue in color. The tip of the sword was missing a small horn, and the entire sword emitted a faint sword glow as if it wanted to stab someone. Good sword. Yi Xian's eyes lit up. This sword was even better than the one Li He gave him. Yi Xian put away the 2 swords and bowed to the 2. Thank you, seniors. He paused, then added, I need to cultivate in seclusion for a while. It won't be long. Chen Shi laughed. No problem. Yi Xian bowed again, then retreated to the side and began devouring. Chen Shi and Chen Shi left. Somewhere in the starry sky outside the dual realm sky, an old man suddenly appeared. The old man held a sword in his left hand, and there was another sword hanging from his waist. The old man was slightly thin, and his hair was tied up high. He looked very spirited. This old man was the Sword sect protector elder, Du Jian. In the Sword sect, he could be ranked in the top 5. Behind Du Jian were 7 other people, 6 men and 1 woman. All 6 of them carried swords on their backs, and their gazes were as sharp as blades. There were only 8 of them. And these 8 people were all from the Sword sect Guardian Hall. The so-called Sect Guardian Hall was a sharp sword that the Sword sect used to defend against outsiders. This time, the Sword sect had sent out the Sect Guardian Hall, which meant that they were serious. Du Jian looked in the direction of the dual realm sky. Someone must be framing our Sword sect, and the most suspicious person is Yi Xian. Behind Du Jian, a male swordsman said in a deep voice, but that Yi Xian is only an unknown realm. Du Jian said indifferently, but don't forget that he once surmounted his realm to kill countless people. Moreover, that 5th-dimensional treasure seems to have recognized him as its master. If he cooperates with that 5th-dimensional treasure, then it's extremely likely that he'll be able to silently take it away and shift the blame to my Sword sect because he's a sword cultivator. What Du Zuantong said is correct. At this moment, a voice came from the side. The person who had come was Jiang Qi. Jiang Qi walked to Du Jian's side. This Yi Xian is not as simple as we think. He is a crafty person. This time, he deliberately brought the 5th-dimensional treasure with him. His goal is to use the experts of the dual realm sky to fight against our Sword sect, and he will reap the benefits from it. At this point, he paused slightly. But we have no evidence. Du Jian said calmly, what evidence do you need? Our Sword sect's sword is the evidence. Let's not talk about Yi Xian first. Since the dual realm sky dared to kill our Sword sect's people, they must pay the price. As for whether they were framed or not, that is no longer important. What is important is that our Sword sect's people are dead. The Sword sect's people were dead. Jiang Qi was silent. He knew that even if there was any misunderstanding between the Sword Sect and the Dual Realm Sky, it was already irreparable. The Sword Sect's people were dead. Du Jian suddenly said, "Kill." As soon as he said this, the sword at his waist suddenly flew out and slashed at the Dual Realm Sky in the distance. The sword cut through the sky and tore through everything. Just as the sword was about to slash into the Dual Realm Sky, an illusory fist hundreds of meters long suddenly tore through space and arrived in front of the sword. Boom! The sky shook violently. The sword instantly flew back in front of Du Jian, and the illusory fist immediately turned into nothingness. At this moment, Chen Shi appeared a short distance away from Du Jian and the others. Behind him were 16 people, all of whom were super experts of the Dual Realm Sky. Even though they were facing the Sword Sect, there was not the slightest hint of fear in their eyes. Those who could come to the Dual Realm Sky were very arrogant. Did they need to fear others? In the distance, the Sword Sect's Du Jian looked at Chen Shi and didn't waste any words. He lightly flicked his left thumb. Buzz! The sound of a sword suddenly rang out. The next moment, a sword light slashed in front of Chen Shi. At this moment, a saber had appeared in Chen Shi's hand. He raised the saber and slashed forward. Break! Boom! As the saber slashed down, the sword instantly flew back in front of Du Jian. The sword trembled violently as if it was withstanding an enormous force. A saber cultivator. Du Jian looked at Chen Shi. "I'm a little blind." Chen Shi said with a smile, "The Sword Sect hasn't stepped into the secular world for many years. In your eyes, your status is transcendent and you can look down on everything. Unfortunately, you underestimate the Dual Realm Sky. The four-dimensional universe isn't something that your Sword Sect has the final say in." Du Jian sneered. "Is that so?" Chen Shi's smile grew wider. "You don't believe me? Let's give it a try." Du Jian sneered. "Let's give it a try. Kill." As soon as he finished speaking, he was suddenly sent flying. Buzz! The sound of a sword's hum shook the sky. Behind him, Jiang Qi and the others also rushed out. 8 sword lights streaked across the sky, heading straight for Chen Shi and the others. Chen Shi said softly, "Don't be careless." As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly stomped his right foot and swung the long saber in his hand. A wave of saber light slashed out. Rumble! Soon, the entire sky was filled with battles. However, as soon as they started fighting, the Dual Realm Sky's side was directly crushed by the 8 people from the Sword Sect. Although the Sword Sect only had 8 people, which was half the number of the Dual Realm Sky's side, the 8 people's battle prowess was somewhat terrifying. Not only were they not at a disadvantage when fighting 1 against 2, they could even suppress them. However, the Dual Realm Sky's experts weren't pushovers. Although they were suppressed, it wouldn't be easy for the Sword Sect's experts to kill them. On the other side, 2 women were watching the battlefield. They were Zhu Xia and Yuan Xiaodao. Zhu Xia had already ordered all the experts from Deity's Templar to return to Deity's Templar. Deity's Templar would no longer participate in these muddy waters. The situation was too complicated. Yuan Xiaodao suddenly said, "Both sides will suffer." Zhu Xia fell silent. After this battle, both the Sword Sect and the Dual Realm Sky would suffer great losses. If the Sword Sect had suppressed the Dual Realm Sky from the start, their losses would definitely be much smaller. However, the problem was that the Sword Sect didn't have the ability to directly suppress the Dual Realm Sky. The Sword Sect had underestimated the Dual Realm Sky. Moreover, the Dual Realm Sky's strength was far from this. However, some people also chose to watch and didn't make a move. If the Sword Sect really wanted to destroy the entire Dual Realm Sky, then these hidden people would definitely make a move. This was because there was a passage to the fifth dimension in the dual realm sky, and this passage had been opened by countless experts of the dual realm sky with their lives. If it was somewhere else, who would be able to open it? Yuan Xiaodao said softly, the sword sect made two mistakes. The first mistake was that they shouldn't have targeted everyone in the dual realm sky. The second mistake was that they underestimated the dual realm sky. Zhu Xia suddenly said, there's another mistake. Yuan Xiaodao looked at Zhu Xia who said softly, they shouldn't have underestimated that Yi Gai. Yi Xian. Yuan Xiaodao was silent. She had interacted with Yi Xian many times, and this swordsman was completely different from other swordsmen. He had many devious thoughts. There was only one way to deal with Yi Xian, and that was to kill him without giving him any chance. Otherwise, there would be endless troubles in the future. Others might not know, but she knew that the treasure was definitely still in Yi Xian's hands. Zhu Xia suddenly said, how do you think this will end? Yuan Xiaodao looked not far away. If both sides continued to fight like this, both sides would definitely suffer great losses. This was a loss that neither side could afford. Even if it was the sword sect, if these 9 people died here, it would definitely be a huge blow to the sword sect. But now that it had reached this point, it was impossible to stop. After all, several swordsmen from the sword sect had been killed by the people of the dual realm sky. At this time, Zhu Xia suddenly said, what do you think that Yi Xian is doing now? Yuan Xiaodao said indifferently, he must be secretly laughing right now. Zhu Xia shook his head and smiled. This guy. While the experts of the dual realm sky were fighting with the sword sect, Yi Xian was currently trying to break through to the extreme creation realm. He was very leisurely now, because no one came to disturb him. After he obtained the 2 swords that Chen Shi and Li He gave him, he started to devour them. After devouring one of the swords, his aura started to rise crazily, and he was getting closer and closer to the extreme creation realm. Just like that, after about 2 hours, Yi Xian devoured another sword. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body, and at the same time, his sword will also vibrated in his body. The aura around him grew stronger and stronger, and after about 2 hours, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. Wang! The sound of a sword suddenly rang out, and in Yi Xian's eyes, 2 rays of sword light flashed like lightning, and the 2 sword wills around him suddenly swept out in all directions. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly opened his left hand, and the surrounding sword wills instantly disappeared without a trace. At the same time, in the palm of his left hand, there was an additional black and white sword condensed from sword will. Extreme Creation Realm. Now, after devouring the 2 swords, he had directly reached the extreme creation realm from the unknown realm. Now, he had reached the extreme creation realm, his physical body had reached the extreme creation realm, and his sword Dao attainment had broken through. In his current state, he could even fight against a life-breaking state expert. Because he still had the executing heaven sword and the immortal slaying sword gourd. If his realm was not enough, he could make up for it with equipment. Yi Xian looked down at the black and white sword in his hand, and the corner of his mouth curled up slightly. Go kill people. As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared on the spot. P.S. Go vote. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.